This happened a few years ago with my friend June when we're maybe 17 or 18. I'm 23 now. We were out driving around late at night on country back roads. We were teenagers growing up in a rural area, so going for a drive was one of the main pastimes. We were both into goth stuff and witchcraft at the time, so we pulled off to the side of the road to walk around a small graveyard in the woods. It was impossible to see at night, but we'd gone there a few times in the day before just to hang out. The whole area is heavily forested, but the path to the graveyard is short. It's right next to the road, just barely hidden in the woods. So we started slowly walking on the small loop that takes you around all the gravestones. We're using our flashlights at the time. We're looking at all of the names on the stones. I was very comfortable being by graveyards at night. I'm very relaxed, honestly. We mused about ghosts and deaths and whatnot, as goth teenagers do. About halfway around the loop, at the furthest point from the car, June got my attention as she notices a light in the woods. It looked far away, like it could have been a car on the road, so we turned away and kept walking. However, about 30 seconds later, she got my attention again. The light was much closer, and obviously moving quickly towards us. And then, I heard the sound of somebody crashing through the woods. It's blatantly obvious now that somebody's coming towards us. They're making a beeline, they backtrack, and so do we run into the car. I unlock it and climbed into the car as fast as I can, and right before the light come on, this huge grisly looking man, dressed from head to toe in camouflage, comes busting out of the foliage and coming right for the car. He's armed with a crossbow and literally sprinting at us, screaming. He's clearly off his head. I reverse as quickly as I could and peel out of there. We don't stop driving for a while, even though we both never saw him following after us when we drive off. We both can't shake the feeling that we're being followed. Finally, I think we both got too tired to stay out any longer, and we went back to our home. I really can't stop thinking about just how quickly he actually got to us. The fact that we're pretty much in the middle of nowhere, and this person is waiting in the woods in full hunting gear with a crossbow, and we're clearly not animals. As we had a flashlight, there's no trespassing signs anywhere. The whole area is around a graveyard. It's obvious that we're not meant to be there, but he definitely wasn't hunting. I got out into the woods and into weird places in the night a lot, and I've seen some weird stuff I would consider supernatural, but this is the one thing that really scared the life out of me. None of these things ever made me afraid to go into the woods like he did. I had my best friend. We'd always go for walks in the forest together. My friend wasn't very well at the time. He had an autoimmune illness, so I had to stay far away from him when we were talking and walking. This was great because it meant that he was unlikely to catch any illness that I potentially had, but kind of scary if you're going through the woods close to night. It didn't matter though. We're both young men who are fairly big, so we didn't really care too much. Call it blind luck that we never ran into anyone until this event, but I was very confident going into the woods. Now we start talking about life and we're just having a good time generally when we decide to sit on some logs and continue our conversation. My buddy turns off his headlamp for a bit to try and save some energy, and I do the same because last time my headlamp went off and it is only because of his that we're able to get out again. As we do so, we suddenly hear steps around us. Neither of us actually reacted at first because we both assumed that one another were moving. It's only a few moments later when our eyes can adjust in the darkness that we realise it's not one another. Now, we both give each other a blank stare when we realise this. It sounds like there's loads of people running in circles around us, but there's literally no one. Like that, we both flick on our headlights, and just as mine comes on, I catch the glimmer of a very tall shadowy figure by a tree. That's enough time for me to let out a scream, and my body sees the exact same thing I do. The craziest part is that you can't see through this thing. The light shines directly on it and there's nothing behind it, and it's slowly coming towards us. We both pick up our bottles and start sprinting as quick as we possibly can back to my friend's car. We both feel like we're about to have a heart attack, but we're safe now. We're both trying to say what the hell was that thing we just saw. And as we do so, we can hear them footsteps again, this time sounding like they're closer than before. We both got straight into his car and sped out of there like there was no tomorrow. To this day, we've never seen anything like it. I mean, we never went back to them woods again for a start, but I can't find that many people that have had similar experiences to us. All I know is that it scared the life out of me, and I'm glad I was not alone when this happened. There's an abandoned house next to mine. The previous owner moved to California 25 years prior and never sold it. I got a flashlight, gloves, and pushed the window open to go inside, starting in the basement. In the basement there was a grand piano. It still plays, but very much out of tune. There's some old World War II stuff, what seemed to be a signed Elvis poster, and other really cool stuff in there nobody should leave. There's basically a whole story in the basement, including a broken wedding picture frame and instruments everywhere. On the main floor was an unmade bed, moulded food in the fridge, half-empty beers and whatnot. The light's actually still on, never been turned off. Then I walked upstairs when I heard crying from one of the side rooms. I know for a fact there's literally nobody in there. That's when I freaked out and have never been back since. I lived in a house that had a really nice annex, or smaller house in the backyard. My grandparents usually lived there, but they had unfortunately passed away in recent years. Now one day I was home alone when I realised somebody's left the light on in there. I'm a bit annoyed because I don't want to go out in the cold and snow, also it's wasting electricity. So I get my coat on and head out. It's about a 500-meter walk, so it's quite a long way down there. I don't mind though. I feel a little bit relaxed, and to be honest it was quite pleasant in the snow. I can see footsteps that lead up to the back of the house, so I think that my brother's probably gone down there. Now, I step inside and realise that it's extremely cold. I know it's snowing, but it shouldn't be like this. I turn around to find where the light switch is, and the moment I raise my hand up, the light goes off on its own. I think this is a little odd, and I hear laughter coming. I realise that my youngest brother's playing a trick on me, and I say, "Ha, that's really funny. Enjoy being in the cold," and I go to leave. As I step outside, I realise that something's off. I can see a figure from my house, and I realise who it is. My oldest brother. Seconds later, my youngest brother appears too. I bolt out of there immediately, getting inside. I can barely get words out to say what happened. Neither of my brothers actually believe me, and it annoys me so much. They actually went out with me to investigate, and we couldn't find anyone in there. They think it was just me messing around or my mind playing tricks on me, but I know what happened to this day, and I've never been back in there since. My oldest brother, who unfortunately passed away, was almost a human killing machine. He could spot game other people couldn't see. Now one day, I was out hunting with him and he used my shoulder as a rest to kill a crow. I couldn't see this thing until it exploded. Now one day, we were out fox hunting. Foxes are very intelligent, and in the winter, sometimes you come across them sleeping on top of hills because the sunlight keeps them warm. So we're walking along and my brother stops and says, "Stop down," in a whisper. About 300 yards away is a fox curled up on a hill, so he lies down and prepares to take the shot. Just as he flipped the safety off, a second before pulling the trigger, the fox basically does a 180 on the snow, still as a ball. Turned out that the fox was actually a hat. Some idiot was wearing a fox hat and decided to drive on a snowmobile on someone else's property where we hunt. He was so lucky that my brother didn't take the shot. I was sitting in my room after getting out of work on the second floor. My little bro is downstairs watching TV. The dog is in the hallway outside my door sleeping. All of a sudden, the dog starts making all kinds of racket, jumping around, barking, clanking nails, howling. I get up to see what's going on and I hear, "Oh, that's a good girl," in a male voice. It didn't sound like my little brother, so I say, "Oh, you're home early," thinking it was my dad's friend or our roomie as I open the door. Soon as I'm there's no one at all but the dog waggling her tail, staring at an empty end of the hallway. My little bro comes upstairs to yell at me for getting his dog riled up, said he heard the same voice thinking it's our roommate. We did a once over at the house with my butterfly knife and his BB gun. Nobody was there whatsoever. I was about 7 years old. My brother was about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mum woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked from a construction area out of town, so it was usually just a couple of us at home. I mean the three of us. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left, it will put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end, which is my room, is across the hallway from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are windowed doors which we always keep locked and rarely ever use. The door on my left actually led to the balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened up to the back porch. Now my mum and brother actually both have a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only ever become aware of this due to the fact that I was such a light sleeper, and they just couldn't help flushing with the door open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. I'm gonna try and pee before I go to bed. The past few nights I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom alone. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway. I don't know if my mum wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories trying to scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it, but she didn't react at all to my brother's confusion. I, on the other hand, am absolutely terrified by this. The fear of seeing a ghost-like figure at the end of the hallway through the window absolutely terrifies me. Now, years later, when I was about 18, my mum and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog that we had for a very short amount of time. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviours when my mum blurted out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food we had?" This really caught me by surprise because in all the years I lived in that house, we never once called the cops, gun-owning family in a quiet rural neighbourhood, etc. I said to her, "What is she talking about?" and she looked equally surprised, as if she just revealed something by accident. "Oh, that's right. I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked outside, I saw a man staring into my bedroom." She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running, and how she actually had to run and grab my dad's pistol before calling the police. I can't remember at all. I mean, I gave them details when they showed up. It's a tall white male, wearing a striped shirt and jeans and short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man they were looking for in the area. It turns out that he had escaped from jail for murder. Now, it sounds so obvious hearing those two things together, but it wasn't until a few years ago, in my mid-20s, that I pieced together what my brother had unknowingly warned us about: a murderer who spent multiple nights staying in our home trying to avoid the police. I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and didn't know anyone in the area, except for the family my dad was friends with, a single mum with 3 kids. Luckily there was a girl a couple of years older than me, 12 at the time I met her, and we get to know each other. We weren't close but ended up having the same friends. One night my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because of my friend's mum being at work, which is where this gets terrifying and sad. Her mother had been helping this one lady through her work and got to know her fairly well. She found out that her sister was in a mental institution recently and was let out. The night Rob is hanging out with my friend, they get a knock on the door. They don't really think much of it, thinking it's just their mum, and answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there and he took off through the window down the road to his house. He never thought about it really, but it wasn't her mum. It was the sister of the lady her mum was helping, and she figured out from talking on later where her family lived and her mum's working schedule. She came in, and this is where I don't know the details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbours to call the police. The lady had brutally murdered my friend a week before Christmas, hid her body, and they had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't even allowed to go to the funeral. A few years ago, I was home alone at night. I was watching TV in the living room when I heard the doorbell ring. Whenever I heard the door ring, especially when I'm home alone, I'm cautious to answer it. I walk up to the peephole without turning on the porch light, so they don't know if I'm actually in or not, which is smart, and look through. It's really dark, but I see a small figure move like a black blob. It's a definite shape, and it had to be around 3 or 4 feet tall, doing a circle dance, dipping down and oscillating its arms forward. Think of a person moving their arms like wings gracefully. It's dark outside, but this figure was more opaque, so I could see what's going on. After a few seconds, I stopped looking through the peephole because I'm so scared. I regained some courage and looked through again, but this thing is gone. To this day, I don't know what that is, and I still get freaked out by it. First off, I want to apologise because English isn't my native language, so sorry if my writing style seems a bit odd. So when I was in high school, I was not a very hard-working student, but I wasn't a troublemaker. I was just an incredibly lazy girl, working the minimum so that my parents wouldn't get angry at me. I always had some kind of easiness regarding schoolwork, and never knew what it truly meant to make effort, so I spent all my classes drawing onto my copybooks without making any true effort for real notes. Now, during my junior year, my maths teacher, who was seen by everybody as a very uptight but caring individual, was particularly upset about this. As many of my other teachers were, he wanted me to work harder. I mean, I wasn't bad at maths. I would usually achieve around 13 or 14 out of 20. Now I'm French, but I assume this is like a B- or something. But sometimes my grades are really low. During a teacher-parents meeting, he told my mum that I was wasting my capabilities, that it was infuriating how much I was lazy. My mum replied that she agreed and that he shouldn't blame himself but should try and push me harder. and it'll be worth it. And he did exactly what she told. In every maths class, he would always question me first before anybody else, was always sitting right next to me. And during the test, he would always tell me, "You can do it, you can do it." It made me feel incredibly uncomfortable because at this age, nobody wants the attention of the whole class on them. My class started realizing that my maths teacher was a little obsessed with me and were teasing me about this. The last class before Christmas break, the maths teacher threw a little surprise party for Christmas. It was very nice and he gave us chocolates and mock champagne and we had a lot of fun. During the party, he pours me another glass of mock champagne, telling me that I deserve it because I was doing better. It was true. I was now getting about a 15 or 16, which is like having an A or so. I accept it, but didn't really drink too much. I have diabetes and already had far too much chocolate. But during the next class, I was feeling bad. I almost fainted and finished my last day of school before Christmas in the nurse's office. At that time, I wouldn't have even thought about it because of the alcohol-free champagne. I thought it was due to my diabetes that I ate too much chocolate. A few weeks later, my class threw some kind of charity event. It was a class project and we were very proud. In my country, we don't have proms, so it was an occasion to wear pretty formal clothes and dance together. The maths teacher was invited and he was helping some of the boys tend to the bar. He served me an alcohol-free cocktail, but before I drank it, a classmate of mine, Flora, poured some vodka in, even though it was forbidden to bring alcohol into the event. I was mad because with my diabetes, I couldn't drink alcohol, so I told her that I can't have it and just threw the cocktail. At the same time, I thought about it. She didn't really worry about me and I didn't like it. Now, the event ended pretty badly because of the alcohol Flora brought us. Some of the guys were very drunk and started breaking things. Flora passed out because of all the alcohol she had. This ended the event. Flora had been admitted to hospital because of her coma was pretty severe, and we spent the next few days being lectured regarding the dangers of alcohol. Not a good time, really. Flora got expelled from school and never went again. I was very upset with her because every event would now be completely different because of this. So I kind of ghosted her and never asked if she was doing better or anything. Now I feel bad about this, but at the time I was immature and young. But because of that, I will never know if she was ill because of the alcohol poisoning or because of my cocktail. A few weeks later, I failed a maths test. It had been a long time since I failed a maths test and the teacher was angry. He yelled at me in front of everyone saying how much of a disappointment I was, and that I would end up living in a cardboard box under a bridge. Something's off. I was feeling unwell. He had a very weird look in his eyes and it gives me chills and I can't help but cry. He calmed down a bit and said he would just give me an hour of detention, during which I will get the joy of copying everything from the lesson. I was a little surprised because normally detention is for bad behaviour, not for bad grades, but I was a little relieved because it was a small punishment. My parents would never know. Indeed, I lived kind of far from my high school and there were only one or so buses every so often. Because of that, even if I finished at 4, I would never get home before 5. And if I've had a detention between 4 or 5, my parents won't know. But then, when he officially gave me the detention hour, he said that he wanted to be personally present during this and that the only possibility was for it to be between 5 and 6. I was nervous because now my parents are gonna know. As I said earlier, I wasn't a troublemaker, so at first I planned to go to detention hour, but during the day, my friends and I talked about it a lot. I was feeling more rebellious, so I decided not to tell my parents that I was in detention and that one of my friends would pick me up at 6 and drive me home. At 5 PM, when heading towards the detention room, I was angry. mumbling that it's not fair for me to have a detention because of one thing, one bad grade. When I arrived in the detention room, I was the only one waiting. I realised then that I would be the only student in detention, alone with that maths teacher who was a little obsessive, and it was getting dark outside. It's a big no for me when I saw him come in. I panic. I said, "I'm sorry, I have an emergency, and now I'll email the school for rescheduling the detention," and I ran. He started to yell at me that I had to obey him, and then he would call my parents, but I don't care. I sprint towards the bus to catch my bus. I was afraid that he would have to call my parents, so when I arrived, I was shaken. But my parents greet me normally. He didn't call them. He never came back the next day, actually over weeks. Eventually, I learned that he quitted his position. A shrink came during an hour to ask us if we wanted to talk about the maths teacher, but as nobody knew him that well or what was going on with him, we didn't have much to say. Until a few months later, that was until a few months ago, I become a teacher. How ironic given my laziness as a teenager. And one day while talking with my co-worker, I mentioned his name, talking about his weird bizarre behaviours that just didn't seem right, and one of my oldest co-workers went very pale hearing his name. In fact, a few days after the detention incident occurred, my maths teacher was arrested for having very bad videos downloaded onto his laptop from the dark web, and weird movies starring very young children. Maybe this detention hour was just a detention hour and I would have got out normally, but I will never know, and always wonder what would have happened if I had stayed. I'm someone who loves to go exploring. Where better than abandoned buildings? Well, I can tell you, abandoned buildings in the forest. Now, my friends would usually accompany me on my exploration trips, but there was a few times that I would just go out on my own. One, because my friends couldn't come, and two, I would get really bored living in the woods sometimes. Now, my dad was a logger, so he would always be out, and my mum taught at a school, so she would have quite long days too. One night in particular, the stars aligned for me to go on one of my adventures alone. All I had with me was a Sony Walkman, which is actually something I loved, and I still think they're incredible to this day. So at the time this was very good, but in hindsight, it's pretty stupid because it meant literally anyone could come up to me and do whatever and I wouldn't know it. I can't say I listened to audio at a good volume too, so... well, I can't hear now, but that's besides the point. So I set out on this one day. I decided to leave my dog at home because as much as I love him, it's a liability to get lost, and in the woods where I live, if your animal goes missing, they'll probably get hunted and eaten by predators, or you just never find them again. I say goodbye to my dog and I feel bad as he sat there watching me through the glass window of the door, but I'm not that bothered. I'll be back in no time, or at least that's what I tell him. So I close the door and off I set. Now this is actually a really nice night. It's a little bit cold and it's going to be dark in a couple of hours, but I'm really happy to be outside and I really find some peace in doing this. I head off in the direction that I always go, directly in front of my parents' house. After going past a small road, there's the woods straight in front of you. Now for some people that might be a terrifying concept, just being faced with darkness directly in front of you, but I actually really enjoyed it. So I walk into the shadowy woods. As I do so, I'm actually having a really good time. Now, there are some abandoned houses and loggers' cabins further up that I'd like to go and find. There's some which are further out that me and my friends have never explored, and I think, hey, why not? My parents won't be home for a while, and I've still got some work to do from school that I really can't be bothered with. So I go further than I normally do. Now, luckily for me, I've been in these woods for such a long time that it's pretty hard for me to get lost. So I make my way to the first waypoint, one of the houses we like to go in. I walk in there and, to be honest, I don't really feel so good. Doing this without my friends isn't really the same, and we're not really joking or trying to make each other jump, so I'm not that excited. I realise I prefer doing things with people and I'm actually quite bored, so I decide to step out and go a bit further. I end up making it past an abandoned logger cabin. There's not really much left of this, it's mostly burnt to the ground. But I stand there for a few minutes and just keep on my way again. Now I know the way I'll make this interesting is going further than I've ever went before. I'm doing this alone, outside of my music playing, but I actually feel quite good at this point. Now I keep hearing clicking sounds in the headphones, which is pretty strange. I'm quite annoyed because I don't want to replace these again, and I try pushing it into the Walkman harder, but it doesn't seem to make a difference. It's quite annoying because I don't know whether there's someone else around here or if it's just the headphones. Now I know, this is really stupid. I should just put them down and go and figure out what's happening and whether somebody's actually stalking me or not. But no, I decide just to keep going. Now this continues and I've accepted that it's a part of the headphones. And I go on for what feels like miles and I cannot find any of the abandoned cabins or houses that I want to explore. Plus it's starting to get a little bit dark. I can still see my way back, but it's probably not the best idea to be out here. But hey, I want to keep going. Now I cannot shake for the life of me the feeling that I'm either not well, or there's an animal near me. There's no real big predators out here that could get a human at least, so I don't feel too scared, but it's a really weird feeling to have. I decide to stop for a moment and just crouch down, just to rest my feet. I don't really want to sit on anything because it's a bit wet from rainfall and I don't want to ruin my jeans. I take off my headphones and for a split second it hits me. The clicking sound's not actually coming from my headphones, it's coming from around me. I think that's pretty odd. Maybe there's some really big cricket or bug which is making this sound that I've not heard before, but it seems a bit powerful, almost like a bassy thump sound that I've not heard before. I'm actually a bit concerned and decide to take off my headphones now and try and figure out what this thing is. After a few seconds the sound stops and I think that's pretty weird, but now I'm pretty scared, so I decide I'm not going to put my headphones on again. I have to be more cautious now. So I continue on my way. I do feel a bit unwell. I haven't felt right since I've set off. It's almost like I have a headache feeling and slight dizziness, which is pretty odd because I felt perfectly fine before. I think, oh, maybe I just listened to music too loud again, and I'm just getting a little paranoid and probably should have brought more water with me. But the show must go on, so I continue further. And what do I see? An old abandoned house that's half burnt down. I can't believe my luck. I've never seen one like this before. I'm really excited to see this. I look around and realise that there's no other houses around or anything. And one thing that I notice that's a bit odd is none of the ground around it's burnt. It looks as though the house was burnt down, but there's no real evidence of a fire. I think this is really strange, but this thing's beautiful. There's a staircase which is collapsed and it just looks like a really old cool house. I think, man, I wish I had my friends here to enjoy this with me. And I can see where a chair once was. I like to soak in the experience and imagine what kind of person would have lived here before and what kind of things would they do. Just as I'm doing this, I hear a loud sound above me for a millisecond that suddenly stops. Now with the adrenaline, I couldn't really focus on what the sound was, but without thinking, I quickly bolt out of the house. I look upstairs and I don't see a thing. Calm down, this is just an animal, I tell myself. It must be an animal, there's no stairs in there. It had to have climbed up. Stop being stupid, keep going. I'm really worried now. and my headaches got worse since I heard the sound. Now I think for a split second I can hear one of my friends in the distance, and suddenly it hits me. One of my friends must have stupidly followed me out here and decided to play a prank on me, and I smile a bit. I say, "Ha, that's really funny, you can come out now." To silence. How my friends have got up there I don't actually know, but this is a pretty wild prank to play on me, and probably a dangerous one because I could have probably just hit them if they jumped out. I say, "Ha, have a good time. I'm gonna leave you on top of here in the dark and you're not gonna be able to get down on your own." And I continued going. Now I thought this was great. I was gonna play a prank on the pranksters who were trying to get me. I realised too that the clicking sound started again, and my friends must be messing with me. I can hear a very faint laugh too as I walk off, and I just start smiling to myself, thinking my friends are gonna go home and they're gonna try and get me again as I keep going. Now it is starting to get dark, but I want to go a little bit further. As I do, the clicking sound stops, and I actually feel a bit peaceful again. I just can't believe they followed me this far out into the woods. But something feels off. It's almost like my heart's telling me something's wrong, but my brain's telling me just to continue. I realise after a while that there's a cave above me too. I'd love to go into there, but it's dark now almost, and it's pretty dangerous, and I don't want to be stuck in there. I'm thinking too, maybe my friends are going to try and prank me up there, so I just sit by the entrance and wait for them to arrive. I can hear laughter again now. I smile to myself again and say, "Come on guys, let's head back, this is dangerous." As I say that, the laughter stops, and the clicking sound starts again, just louder this time. I'm sure they're above the cave now. I don't know how they've got up there, but this is pretty weird. Just as I'm having this thought, I can hear a very loud laugh coming from the belly of the cave. Suddenly, I realise something's wrong. I go to laugh and call out for my friends nervously, but it would be literally impossible for them to have got into the cave. I stop again, and I can hear a whisper sound. Something is calling my name to go into the cave. It sounds just like my friends, but not at all, if that makes sense. I realise something is so wrong. It's impossible for my friends to be out in that cave, plus it's pitch black. And the headache, I can't get rid of it. Suddenly, my senses come to life. I drop my Walkman on the floor and bolt it and start running back in the direction that I've come. What's worse now is that I don't actually know how I get back. I don't know where I've come from. I'm disorientated and in pain in the abyss. I suddenly see the house that I went to earlier, and I sprint towards it, screaming to my friends to stop and that it's not funny now. I don't want to go near the house because I don't know if it's my friends there, and just as I get close to it, I hear a sound moving upstairs again, and a voice. I don't take a second to understand what it actually is, and I keep going forward. I'm actually quite annoyed now because I've realised that I've also left my Walkman. But God, whatever that is can actually have it, and if it's my friends, I'll bring it back to me. As I'm running, I'm not sure if I can hear footsteps behind me. I have to stop for a second to catch my breath, and just out of the corner of my eye, I can see a massive shadowy thing following me. Now this thing has to be at least 7 feet tall, and I don't need to see anymore. I just start running. Now I used to do athletics, so I just about have the physique to do this, and I bolt it in a time that would make Usain Bolt jealous. I just keep going and hammering. Tears have actually welled up in my eyes, not because I'm scared, but because of how bad my head is, and now I know that a person is probably stalking me. I can taste blood in my lungs where I'm trying so hard to get out of here and make it back to safety. I can't really hear the sounds behind me because my heart's beating so loud in my ears. After running for what feels like an eternity, I can see the old cabins that I recognise. I know I'm almost into safety now. I stop for a second and I can't hear anything behind me. I really quickly spin around to check and there's nothing there. But just as I stop, it starts again, the rhythmic clicking sound, along with my headache, which is now pulsating in my brain. I pick up the pace again and just jog the rest of the way towards the tree line. I can see a light ahead of me, and I'm terrified. I jump behind a tree. But something that's so simple is actually the most peaceful sound. It's a car engine. It's a car. I made it back to the road where my parents are. My house isn't far. I quickly jump out and flag down the first car I can see. Annoyingly, they don't stop and just keep going. I'm gonna have to press on alone. I then walk at a quick pace, trying to get some air into my lungs again back towards where my home is. I can see my dad's car out the front, and I know that he's gonna be mad that I've not said where I've gone and that I'm not in, and also confused as to why I left. I come in and he's on the phone to my mum and says, "Oh, there he is," and puts the phone down quickly, says, "What's wrong with you? What happened?" And I barely explain the story and my dad's face goes white. He never told me why, but I can tell something's off. He says, "Are you okay?" And I say, "Yeah." And he tells me, "Never go out into those woods again alone, do you understand me?" And I said, "Of course, but it could have been my friends." He said, "I don't want to hear it." And that was the last I ever spoke to about my dad of this experience. The next day, I spoke to my friends and they all laugh at me saying, "Yeah, that didn't happen." I now know that they didn't play a prank on me and there was something out there that was following me. I want to tell you it was a person, but it just couldn't have been, unless it was some crazy psychopath in a camouflage suit that could run without making any sound on the slippery rocks that stalked me all day, or maybe it was something else. The thing that scares me so much about my experience is the fact that whatever this thing was could move so quickly, it could outrun me, an athletic runner, or formal one, and it could mimic my friends so well, to the fact that I was convinced that it was my friends out there playing a prank on me, and what's worse is it's got my Walkman to this day probably. Since that experience, I never went out into those woods again, not even with my friends. I was almost hoping something similar would happen to them so they could believe me, but it just never did. And the headache, I've never had anything like it, and why was it worse with the sounds I would hear? It still gives me nightmares to this day, and I just don't know what to think of it. I've never experienced anything like it in my life, and I just hope that I never have to again. I still have nightmares about it, and I just hope to God whatever this thing was, it doesn't follow me again. I'm so scared even writing this. So this happened about 12 years ago. My family owns a farm in the heart of Indiana reservation. One winter, I was home for Christmas taking care of the farm while my parents were out away Christmas shopping. I was home alone, so while late in the night, I hear all of our cows freaking out. I knew it has to be wild dogs that are rampant in the area, and I know something's off. So I throw on some boots, grab a gun, and load it up, heading out to the field. This was a perfect scenario for a horror movie. It's cloudy but full moon, and it was breaking through the clouds just right up into the snow. I ran out into the middle of the field, and just in time I see two dogs that are starting facing up towards each other fighting. I think perfect, 2 for 1. So I pumped the shell of my 12 gauge, and then it happened. The two dogs heard the rack. They both stopped, looked over at me on their back legs. I immediately froze. Every story I hear about skinwalkers and all the other native legends I grew up with flew to mind. Keep in mind I'm a white guy, and up until then, these are just boogeyman stories to me. I sprint back for home and never look back. So about 3 years ago, I went out camping with my girlfriend, and she's always expressed interest but never been out there before. The spot we went to go in is the Horror National Forest and is my go-to camping/traveling trail spot in the forest. My family's been going here for about 6 years and my friends introduced me about 10 or so years ago. So we went for a weekend trip and I'm glad we didn't go any longer. When we got there, everything was going well except we noticed a group of people that were hanging out next to our campsite. They were just stargazing and ended up leaving. Then around midnight is when the weird stuff started to happen. At first it sounded like somebody was laughing at us, but the laugh never ended and got very high pitched as it kept going. After a while we got kind of scared and went into my tent to try and sleep, and that's when the laugh/noises moved up higher and then start circling around the campsite. After a while of wondering what was happening, it suddenly stopped and then starts again around 3 AM. When it started again, the fire was going out, so I went to stoke the fire with my shotgun and flashlight in hand in case there's any coyotes that come up to the campsite, but I don't see anything or hear any movements below. This went on until 6 AM and then stopped, and finally we were able to get some rest. After we woke up and checked around the campsite, we don't actually see anything out of the ordinary, so pack up. Once we were packed up and good to go, I start my vehicle and it's completely dead. This really freaks me out as I'm always paranoid about leaving things plugged in, and it's really weird for it to be completely gone. I wasn't able to get a jump from anyone. Now after this happened, I told my friend who had shown me the campsite and also informed me that there's a campsite about 25 miles away with a cabin. He gets freaked out. He told me about 2 incidents when he's had one at a campsite and one at a cabin. At the campsite, he stated that one night after he had returned from the trail, he went to go to bed, but had stayed up to let the fire keep going and have a few drinks. While he was hanging out, he was just looking off into the distance and sees a pair of eyes staring at him. He puts a flashlight and high-powered gun there, but as soon as he does, he can't find it again. So he packed off and went to bed. He didn't tell us because he didn't want to scare us. At the cabin, he was hanging out with his older brother and just chilling by the fire outside when they both see eyes staring at them from the trail that leads into the woods. They stated that at the height of the eyes, it's probably 7 feet tall plus. They started shooting their rifles there, which are 230-30s, and the eyes disappear. But once they're done, they reappeared closer at the point where they're both freaked out enough to get into the cabin and not leave until daylight. We have no idea what this could have been, but all felt very scared and don't know why these events keep happening. My grandmother on my mother's side has always been very superstitious, for lack of a better word. She's not religious, but she does believe in paranormal. Her mother was full-blooded Navajo and her father was Irish. Either way, she had never been anywhere east of Montana and she grew up in Nevada. One year, when I was in grade school, we went to visit her. Most of the visit was pretty uneventful, typical boring old people stuff. Except she always kept her curtains drawn shut and would peek out the window, and when somebody said, "What are you doing?" she said, "The Yendaloshi is watching me." This went on for nearly the entire visit until a few days before we're due to leave. My grandma and my then baby brother, who's now 19, were all in the front of the yard that evening, planting flowers, when all of a sudden my grandma starts shouting, and insert little brother's name here, to get away from the creature, it's not safe. Of course in Nevada we assume it's a rattlesnake, so we run outside and see my grandmother clutching my little brother and shaking in terror against the side of the house. Standing out in the yard, there's a large black Great Dane sized dog. It was staring at my grandmother with an intensity that I've never seen before. It kept looking at us, gave a little hound and bolts off. I remembered thinking it moved so quick it didn't look real. I asked my grandmother what happened. She kept repeating, "It found me. It found me." A while ago, when I was in early high school, I was left at home for some reason. I can't remember the reason, but I was left home alone after a lot of reaching my teenage years. So, a little information on my house. I don't live in a rural area in particular. I certainly wouldn't call the area civilized though. There are barns within walking distance of my home. I guess the area is developing because there are also subdivisions around. Also, my home has a sliding glass door, not another one, that leads to the back deck. So, I was home alone when I heard a knock at the door. It's common for my parents to sometimes leave the home without their house keys, so I have to let them in. My family has a special knock though, so we know it's one of us. This knock doesn't sound like one, so I just ignore it because I don't want to deal with the stranger at the door. Whoever it was knocked again in a familiar pattern, so I reluctantly went to the door. When I get there, I see no one. I figured that whoever it was had just left because I took my sweet time getting there. Then, I guess I heard something, or rather, someone come into the sliding glass door. Then I guess I heard a sound just off to the side. Another thing, members of my family would never really go to that door, so it's kind of weird. So I went to the door and don't realize anything. I slightly opened the sliding door and hear a voice. It sounded like my mother coming from underneath the deck, I guess. I only say this because I definitely heard the same voice from my mother, but it's not my mum, and nothing's in front of me. I can't remember exactly what it said, but something like, "Open the door," and my name. Now I'm a super paranoid guy, and I know my mum wouldn't be hiding there if she wanted to. Hours later, my mum actually shows up and I tell her what happened, and she confirmed that she was not at the house earlier and did not try to get me to open the back door. So for years, I didn't really know what to make of the experience. Now it was truly a minor thing, but at the same time, that's pretty weird that something was trying to mimic my mum's voice and trying to get me to open a door. Of course it could have been in my head, but things like that are pretty scary. To be honest, I'd be less scared if there was somebody actually there and I could account for that, but that's the thing, I can't. So 2 months ago, my boyfriend and I moved out of a bigger city to the woods. We both lived in the country before and my home is in the next town over. We both feel comfortable here, but since we've moved, things have got progressively weirder. We lived on about 2 acres of mid-Michigan, and behind the house is nothing but woods. We have 2 animals, one 1-year-old Doberman and a 4-year-old Maine Coon, which is a big breed cat. It is currently midwinter here, and we've been hit with a few good snowstorms since Christmas. Also, the house is surrounded by motion sensing lights and cameras. Okay, context over. The first week we moved in here, there was what sounded like some big thing pacing back and forth in the tree line. When we called out to whatever it was, there was no reply. But the pacing doesn't stop. This continued every night, pretty often. Now within about a week, whatever it was had started murmuring to itself in the woods. This creeped the life out of me. And what was really weird was that we would be out on the patio, and the next thing, the motion lights turn on for no reason. Not thinking much of it, because you know, we live in the woods, there's all kinds of animals that can come here, so I just ignore it. Yet over the next few nights, it got to the point where the lights just don't ever turn off, like something's constantly triggering it. Remember, we're in Michigan. There's been a good coat of snow on the ground for weeks now. Theoretically, you should see tracks from whatever it is keeping the lights on, right? No, nothing, not even deer tracks. Since this has begun happening, our animals are acting really strange. The Doberman sits at the back door and barks. Not like any bark, but the kind you get when something's about to go wrong. I've literally never heard him so amped up before, and we've had him since 8 weeks. Yet, when you open the door to let him out, he becomes timid. He won't wander too far into the back and he'll never go out beyond the tree line. Sometimes he won't go outside at all. It's like he wants to just sit there and make his presence known. The Mancoon is just interested in our backyard, constantly staring off though, as though his gaze is broken into something he can't snap out of, and he starts meowing like he's telling us something. Though tonight, however, that was the most scary thing that I've experienced before. So our sliding door goes into the living room just beyond the patio. So we're sitting on the couch winding down for the night, and both animals are actually with us too. I suddenly hear what sounded like our dog outside whimpering in distress, like he's cold or hurt. However, the dog's no more than 5 feet from me on the couch. I try to ignore this, but it continues until I wake up my boyfriend. It then stops, and I think, maybe I'm just hearing this, but he falls back asleep, and I put the blanket on him. Then I hear the sounds of our cat whimpering like it's hurt. This is when I get up to make my boyfriend check it out. He walks the perimeter of the house and I peek my head out of the side to watch. We both hear branches snapping in the woods but no tracks. And I hear the whining again. Our motion has not been to move in the last 6 hours and just listen. Our cameras haven't picked up anything and there's no tracks in the snow. I don't know what to do. When I was 15, my father and I loved to go camping. This is something we did whenever we had the opportunity. There was some really good forest around where we lived, full of life and sounds. Probably the most peaceful part for my dad at least was the sounds of the nature. It annoyed me, but my father loved it. It made a difference from the mechanical sounds of the job where he worked. So on one particular evening, we do some fishing. We're having a great time looking up at all the stars. The sun's just beginning to set, and you can just about see the northern star in the hemisphere. We decide to call it a night. Now while we're walking back to our camping site, my dad continually stops, not saying why. Now normally I just make fun of him, but I can see that he has his hand on his gun. I know something is wrong. I don't want to scare my dad and act as though I don't notice anything. Every time that we begin walking, we can hear a sound, louder than our own footsteps, that can't be identified as one specific thing. It's hard to describe, but almost like a deep thud, just beyond your range of hearing, but you can still notice it, if that makes sense. So anyway, we continue towards our camp when my dad suddenly shouts out, "Hey, you stop immediately, I have a gun." I ask my dad what's going on. He tells me to be quiet. He says you take one more step and this is your last warning. And with that, gunfire. There's a few moments of silence before my dad grabs my hand and tells me to run. I don't know what's going on and begin crying in fear. What's more strange is we run past our campsite. We run all the way back to where our car is and speed out of there. He tells me to never tell my mum what happened and that he'll explain one day. Now as you can imagine, this is the most terrifying experience in my life. Eventually my dad did tell me. He said he thought we were being followed by a very large man, but he eventually caught a glimpse of something in the moonlight. Now it looks like a person, yes, but upon closer inspection, he can tell that it's definitely not a normal person. He describes it to me as a skinwalker. Now I don't know too much about them, just that they're to be avoided. He said that's when he pulled the trigger. He knows he landed a direct hit on it, or at least within an inch of this creature, and it didn't even move an inch. This is when he made us begin running. So this happened 17 years ago, so please forgive me if the exact details are fuzzy. So it's the summer of 1999. I was spending the vacation with my mother in New Mexico. I was a 12-year-old at the time and had a severe attitude. I made friends easily with a few girls that lived just around the corner from my mum's home. We spent every moment together that summer. We're a group of 4, all of us thinking we were older and smarter than everyone. Nikki, Katie, Julie, and myself were the last generation of home phone lines, playing outside on the trampoline until dark and sleepovers. We would watch VHS tapes, listen to cassette tapes on our Walkman. It was okay to let your children walk around town at night, and we very rarely locked our front door. We had no cell phones or internet. My backyard had a concrete wall around it and a gate. Now behind the wall was desert as far as the eye could see. Just a barren wasteland of dirt, cacti, shrubs and mountains way off in the distance. This town had a major railroad track running straight through it. There was a major street that had a gas station, restaurant and hotels and attractions. We all received the same warnings from our parents. Stay out the desert, stay away from the tracks, and don't walk the main strip at night. Do you think we listened though? Absolutely not. Julie, Nikki, and I spent our days walking through the desert, crossing the tracks down the strip to Katie's home. Sometimes we would just walk around till dusk. Some days, we would go to my home to jump on the trampoline. This particular day, we get to Katie's house prepared to stay the weekend because her parents are out of town. We were gonna have a party. The first few nights, the girls would jump in from a spiral staircase to a giant beanbag. I refused to participate in this, due to my extreme fear of heights. When we got down to the sleepover business, so to say, and decided to watch the original Exorcist, you know, the one with Linda Blair, I didn't sleep. The second night, we all told our parents that Katie's mum was going to drive us to the movies. We all got money from the movies, then promptly walked down to the strip to get junk food. Now, I wish I could say that we're aware of the surroundings, but we're not. We were absolutely oblivious of the man who followed us all the way back to the home. I feel that I should mention that Katie's parents are loaded. They have a huge property with numerous buildings, broken down cars that her dad was remodeling. Their house had a large open kitchen and dining and living room. There were no walls and the whole room was lined with windows. There were 2 doors front and back. The day was just as planned. We get our junk food and make it home safely. We made pizza in the oven, and for some reason, one of the girls turns on the news. As we're eating, we hear a story about staying inside because there's a report of a suspicious man walking on the strip. That's it, suspicious man. We laugh and joke about it. Fast forward a couple of hours. I don't remember what happened, but as girls do, someone said something that hurt Julie's feelings and she storms out of the home. I went after her, opened the front door just in time to see her lighting a cigarette. I sat there with her on a bench while she gone on about the other 2. Suddenly, the air grows thick with anxiety. Julie felt it too. I quietly ask her if she feels as though she's being watched. She responds with a little nod, and then we're blinded. Someone's in a car in the driveway. My heart's racing as I stood up, pulling Julie out of the spot she seems to be stuck in. As we turned to run inside, the man made a sound. I can't describe this sound other than a high-pitched squeal that turned into a growl. I was scared beyond all reason, but somehow I'm able to get myself and Julie inside. The moment we're inside, the headlights go off. It's pitch black again. I lock the door and turn off the light. By now, Julie has regained her composure to tell the other two what's happened. As I frantically check the back door and turn every light off, I tell them to be quiet and listen by the back door. I heard the car door close. I was praying to every god that he would go away. Then, right by my cheek, the door handle started to turn slowly, now frantically. I crawl away from the door. I now move over to where my friends are. For the next 2 or 3 hours, we sat still, listening to this man bang on every window or door trying to get inside. The phone was located across the room right next to the 2 windows. I finally got up, gathering the courage to run to the phone. I call my mum. I tell her that we're all alone and someone's trying to breach the house. I hung up with her and waited. Julie screamed to the man that we called the cops, and all of a sudden, the banging stops. We sat there listening to him getting in his car. Then, the sound starts again, that turned into a growl. He's gone now. My mum and stepdad then show up, checking out the place. They found tire tracks and cigarette butts in the driveway. Whoever this was had been watching us for a while. The truly scary part is all the scratch marks on the windows and doors. Clearly not possible for a human to make. This is why I know it was a skinwalker. Needless to say, Katie spent the rest of the weekend at Nikki's house and had a great story for her parents, which of course they didn't believe. Even to this day, I'm certain this was something supernatural and not a normal person. I just hope they never come back to me. Me and my father would always go hunting together when I was younger. It's honestly one of the most fond memories I have of being young. There was nothing more exciting than getting back from school, going to see my dad, getting in his truck and going out hunting. Now, I never shot any guns at the time. Of course I didn't. I was far too young, but that didn't take away from the joy of the experience. What was better was we also brought Lucky, our dog, with us. She would keep me company, and I'd always have a great time with her regardless. Now, there was one incident that really shook my dad, and I knew it was bad back then because I'd never seen him shook before. I mean, I've never even seen him this shook after. Even back then I knew something was seriously wrong. So my story takes place 20 years ago. It's on one of them summer evenings. My dad and I go out hunting. We're having a really good time, to be honest. The only problem is there's far too many bugs around, and my dog keeps on barking randomly. It's a kind of bark that goes through you, and in the end I just look at her and tell her to shut up. I love her, but everyone has a breaking point. Anyway, we're having a really good time. We stop and make a small campfire, roast some marshmallows, feed my dog some dog treats. We start talking about things we've done throughout the week and how my school's going. I start telling my dad how much I love playing football, and how he says that if I keep it up, I might be able to go really far one day. As we're doing so, Lucky starts going mental. I just look at my dad with frustration. It made me jump. I've dropped my marshmallow into the fire, and it's now burnt. I go, come here girl, and reach for some more dog treats, but she doesn't seem interested. I think, she's finally stopped eating, I don't believe it, and laugh at my dad. But my dad's looking off to the side. I can tell something isn't right now. I go to say about the dog, and he hushes me. He has a very serious look in his face. He tells me to get up now, in a very low tone. Lucky's going crazy though. Not barking now, but acting very passive aggressive, with her head low to the ground, making this deep growl that I've never heard before. This alone terrifies me. My dad then says we gotta get out of here. Now I don't know what he's saying, but we immediately put the fire out, get the guns and our other stuff, and leave the marshmallows and dog treats. I know something's bad because my dog doesn't even go and reach for the treats. I ask my dad what's wrong, but he tells me to keep quiet. He eventually says, well, I just saw something. No hunters should be out in the area. I checked it out before, we're the only ones here. I don't know if it's a park ranger maybe, but why would they just be staring like that? Anyway, we're about halfway back to our truck. I'm annoyed because I don't know why we've had to pack up so early, and I've left my marshmallows. We suddenly hear a voice coming from what seems to be directly behind us. We both stop. It sounds like one or two people talking to each other, but I can't make out a word of it. This is weird because I didn't think voices could carry over the sound of the bugs and stuff, especially not at this time of year. My dog begins doing this weird thing where she stands just in front of me and my dad and doesn't move like she's pointing. I then hear another snap. I look up and say, Dad, what the hell? Why is there a skull there in the bushes? I didn't think we had elk out here. Just as that happens, my dad grabs my arm and tells me to run. All three of us then bolt it to where the truck is. As we're running, we can hear the voices seeming to get closer and closer. I say, Dad, it's just a park ranger, relax, you can hear them, or hunters. He says, I've been doing this for way too long. That's no normal hunter or park ranger. The dog begins barking like crazy. We get into the truck and my dad floors it out of there. Now, he didn't tell me what he thought had happened at the time, but he began speaking to my mum about what happened. Now, I've never seen my dad look so scared in my life before, not even to this day. As I'm lingering around their door, I hear him say the word skinwalker. Now, I didn't know what it was at the time, but I learned in my adult life what it was, and I'm certain that's exactly what we saw on that day. This has left me feeling extremely shook, and I'd love some opinions. So last year, I had a very strange experience in a national forest out in California. I was by myself, on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into the national trail, or more like national forest. Now, I should say I like to camp in national parks and forests, because it's isolate, so my dog can roam free. A trade-off for sketchy rough drives into parks sometimes. Now anyway, I was driving up this dirt road, kind of curling up a mountain around maybe 5 p.m. It was very nice out, sunny and warm, with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area, and that feeling did not let up. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay there, and I even texted my boyfriend about it, for as long as I could on my phone before I lost my service. I was looking for a sign of another person having been here lately, but I don't see anything. I'm beginning to worry now. I pull over, getting out of my car with my dog, looking over the edge and notice a dead squirrel, some broken glass mixed in with dirt and gravel. Yucca, my dog starts to growl slightly. She is vocal, but I've almost only ever seen or heard her growl with other dogs. Not for no reason. Now, I did see her growl at a possum once, so it could be something she smelt maybe. This place continued to make me feel quite on edge, but I pride myself in being an independent traveller and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a bit further with my grumbling dog. I need to see if I can find a good place to camp at. I continued to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind, no one is going to be going more than 5 or 10 miles an hour up this thing, and that's if there's anyone even there. I hear men's voices. They sound close, and I think I should call out to them, so I stop my car, but kind of freeze up and feel like I shouldn't. You know that feeling you get in your gut sometimes that something's just wrong, and you're in a situation that you somehow shouldn't be? Well, it was that. Now, I can't really make out what they're saying. I don't see any sign of people anywhere, and I get back in my car and continue to drive forward and cautiously look for where the voices are coming from. Now, I've never ran into people in a national park or forest before when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling I'm having grows. It just doesn't make sense why they're up here. I give up being brave and go to turn my car around. I honestly don't remember how Yucca was acting on the way down. I was scared and focused on getting out of there. I distinctly remember being surprised at her grumbling when we were standing outside of my car, kind of dangerously quick when I went back down the mountain, not seeing any sign of anyone. I decided to spring for the luxury and get a hotel for the night. I mean, it makes sense, right? I figured I was just fine. Huge and open spaces can be intimidating, I told myself. The voices? They could have been echoing from somewhere else far away and just sounded close. Now, animals die, glass gets broken. Nothing happened too. Cool. But I remember this place. It just sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies and if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to the feeling I had driving up the mountain. And it's honestly kind of interesting to me and also frightening. I recently happened across some information as well as some Native American lore that made me extremely uneasy. Now, fast forward a year. I've mentioned this place to a few people and the haunting vibes it gave me, but nothing more. Googled the national park once and didn't see anything, but didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things of that nature, so my boyfriend and I were coming up on finishing our round trip yesterday. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 2 or 3 hours left and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts. We went from the no sleep one to lots of different ones. Now, I'm half paying attention, petting my dog, playing Pokemon on an emulator. And here's a story about Wendigos. It then very briefly says what they are and how they can mimic voices. I mean, when I say I had the worst chills ever when I heard that. I asked my boyfriend if he remembers the National Forest, and I'm freaked out now. He says he does, and he reminds me that he texted me I was probably close to a Wendigo. I remember him saying that, but didn't know much about their lore and thought he was just being funny, like yeah, Bigfoot stalking you or some other dad joke. He was like, no, I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said it specifically because you were hearing voices that you couldn't trace. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable information out there, but I tried to find more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I then looked up the missing people search in the area I was in, Mendicano, and I went through different websites and news articles of people going missing. They're all a little hidden underneath national park websites and pictures of trees. I remembered looking up the forest I was in about a year ago and didn't see anything and realised these stories didn't seem to be spoken about much. This piques my intuition. I then searched for the exact area I was in. It started with that over 100 people in the last 8 years had gone missing and not been found, many of which are found dead. Now this terrifies me. I didn't know any of this before I went in there. Remembering how unsafe I felt and how much I wanted to get out of there terrifies me. I felt so uneasy, and to this day, even hearing a voice terrifies me if I don't know where it's coming from. I have never went back to that national park since. I don't want to. So my father was a firefighter, and he had really inspired me to do the same. He would always tell me these stories about things that would happen, things that wouldn't happen, the challenges, and just how much joy it would actually bring to him doing a good job. Now my dad loved going outdoors, and so did I. We actually spent a lot of our times going exploring the woods or going fishing. Sometimes even hunting, but not as much as I got older, but that's another story. We'd also go on camping trips and just loved being outside generally together. And living in such a heavily wooded area, it was only natural that I followed the same and fell in love with the woods like he did, and wanted to be a firefighter too. It took a lot of hard work and training, but one day I became a firefighter and I absolutely loved it. Now the thing I liked more than anything was when we would get calls to go out into the great outdoors. Now my father actually said the same. He just liked the fact that you're in nature and you feel kind of at peace when you're doing your job, and it's actually a lot more calm than normal. Especially when the elements were at play, like it might be misty or foggy. I don't know, it just made it a really cool job. But however, there was one story that my dad told me about the woods that I could never forget and never made sense to me. He said it was something him and his friends who went on the call out would never really speak about to their peers or anyone above them, because they were worried that they just wouldn't be believed. There was a certain area that every time they got a call into, things would go weird. The radios just would not work. They always felt as though they'd walked into an area where the atmosphere changed and they just had a really weird vibe. Now on one night in particular, they get a call out just like any other, and they know that they're heading to this area in the woods. So they all feel a little hesitant, but they're all trying to psych each other up. They have to go and investigate an apparent missing person in the woods. Now, this isn't something they would usually do, but they were in the area so decided to help. They were looking for an elderly man who was apparently dressed in white clothing like a nightgown. Now, to most people this would be pretty normal, but just considering the area they were going to, they all felt a little weird about it. They eventually make it to the area that they have to search, and they have to get out of their vehicles because the woods are quite dense. They have some flashlights and they start off. Now they search for a good hour and can't find anything. They end up splitting up to cover more areas. Now my dad is actually relatively calm at this point, convincing himself that the woods are fine and it's just in his imagination. He goes to radio to his buddy that he cannot find anything and thinks they should probably head back because if they can't find anything now, they're not going to. As he does so, he realizes that his radio is not working. Now, he worries for a second but realizes, oh yeah, this is what always happens in this area, and tries on a backup channel but still has the same issue. He then realizes that he has to turn around now because what's worse than one missing person is two. He thinks he can see his friend up in the distance and calls out to him, but there's no answer. George, I'm here, can you hear me, buddy? Nothing. He thinks this is pretty weird, but maybe George is just too engrossed in the situation. Now, my dad takes one step forward then stops. He says he gets a feeling that he's never felt before, like something's really off with the whole situation. He's frozen in his footsteps as his voice grows a bit weaker. George. He slowly turns his flashlight on to where he can see a man standing, and he realizes it must be the missing person. It's not his fellow firefighter, it's somebody wearing all white. My dad says the moment the flashlight hits this figure, he can realize that it doesn't seem to have any hands or feet. It's hard to describe because of the mist, but my dad's sure it's not his mind playing tricks on him. He then sees this figure slowly turn around, and he says his face is absolutely horrifying. It's almost disfigured, but not, if that makes any sense. He does this disgusting smile with no teeth, and, like that, he vanishes. My dad said he was frozen in the spot for at least 10 seconds. He tries to scream out for help, but he can't, and he just sprints. He runs as quick as he possibly can for what must have been at least 15 minutes before he eventually bumped into his buddies. His friends are immediately really concerned, and he tells them what happened, and they all look at each other like they know something he doesn't. One of the firefighters then explains to my dad that George has seen exactly the same thing. He found the missing person, but as he approached it, it vanished. Now what's worse is when they radioed this in, the station told them to stop being ridiculous and to get out there to keep searching. This time they went in twos in case anything else strange happened. And they didn't find anything. Now you can imagine, that story was pretty badly stuck in my mind when I get my calls to go out to the forest. Now, to be honest with you, it didn't escape my memory when I was on call because of course, I'm doing a job here. That was until one day I got called to the exact same area of the forest that my dad said he went to. It's not a missing persons this time, however, there's a small cabin that's on fire. Now we believe this is an arson attack, and we're pretty annoyed that not only are there people stupid enough to be out in the forest at night like this, but now we've got to go out into the middle of nowhere. We can't do our job that we're supposed to do in other areas and put out a fire. Of course it's understandable, you don't want half the forest setting on fire, but it's just generally annoying. I'll never understand why people do things like this, but I digress. I haven't shared this story with any of my buddies before, so they're not sure about this area. Luckily for us, when we get out of our vehicle, we all have perfect radio signal. Now the strange thing is, when we get to the supposed area of the fire, we actually can't see anything burning, let alone embers. Now that's really strange because where there's smoke there's fire, but we can't see smoke or fire, and we have to set out on foot. Now there's only 4 of us at the time, 2 of which are very close friends of mine and the other's a new guy. So we all have dismounted and get our flashlights, we do our radio checks and go through all the channels, everything's working fine. We begin by setting off in the general direction that the call was made. Now we walk for what feels like a very long time and can't actually see anything, and suddenly the new guy calls over to me, "Hey, I think I've got something." And what do you know? Up ahead of us is a burnt down cabin. Now, it's strange because it looks as though it's rained recently, but there's no water present. There's just some tiny bits of smouldering. Well, that's one good thing. We don't actually have to put out the fire, but we have to make sure that nobody was there. And luckily for us, there was no signs of any life whatsoever. So we head over there to quickly check out what's happened and try and make a report of exactly what caused it. Now strangely, we can't seem to find any reason for the fire to have happened. We do call out to see if there's any idiots that have caused it and might be hiding waiting to see what happened, but we literally don't get any response at all. The report didn't take long, and as I'm standing there trying to figure out what happened, my buddy Ben lets out a terrifying scream. He says, "What in the hell is that?" We all turn around and we can see he's as pale as a ghost. I've never seen Ben like this before. Also, the new guy looks terrified too. The new guy won't even speak. They both swear to us that they saw a man in a white gown staring at them who disappeared into a tree. Needless to say, we didn't want to wait around for long, but we have to investigate what's happened. Suddenly, I become petrified with fear as I've realised what my dad said and where we must be standing. I'm pretty sure the new guy and Ben have just seen exactly what my dad saw, and George. I decide not to tell them the story because I feel like I'm having cardiac arrest currently, and I don't want to scare them further. We quickly do a look around and there's no one. To make this worse, not only one of them saw it, but two. So we know they weren't imagining it, and there's nowhere somebody could have ran or hid. We were too quick. We decide to call it into the station, but they just tell us that it must have been the new guy worrying and triggering some kind of placebo effect for Ben, but I know that isn't true. We have no idea what caused that fire, and no idea what the figure was, but the way it was described to me by my friends is exactly the same as what my dad saw. And when I told my dad what happened afterwards, he said promise me never go out into them woods again. Now luckily this was after I changed careers, but my god, he didn't have to tell me that twice. I have no idea what happened, and what terrifies me is that 4 people have all seen the exact same thing. A group of friends and I rented a place on a lake just to have a fun adventure and weekend. We're all young in our mid-20s and it's supposed to be a big party. For the most part, it is. The Friday and Saturday morning, we pretty much went all out to have a good blast on the water and just have fun. Stupid stuff really. Naturally, Saturday afternoon rolled around and we're all dead from going out, so decided it would be a night of no drinking and just having a chill evening and night. That's what it was, relaxed. So 9 PM comes rolling around and about 8 of us are inside the house and 5 are outside. The house was a 2-story with a 2nd-story deck / back porch. It was surrounded by the woods, and then down through the woods you could hit a lake. I'll mention that we had already experienced some weird vibes from the locals when we first arrived in town, mostly just backcountry old timers that assumed we're leering and irritating because we're having fun. But the town and the lake were large, so nobody really seemed to care. Anyway, 3 of my friends were on the upstairs back porch and my other friend and I were downstairs outside, just talking on this little area near the woods. I mean, it was otherwise just a really nice night. My friends and I were getting lost in conversation when all of a sudden there's a really weird feeling that comes over from us behind the woods. It was so strong that we both kind of went quiet, and out of nowhere, this large, loud chanting abruptly comes from the woods. I have no idea how far away it was because the way the lake's set up, so I'm pretty sure the voices carried through the forest. It sounded like cult chanting, and all of the voices are male. I mean, they were loud and perfectly in sync. I think we froze for all of 20 seconds before I can't contain myself and dart towards a home, with her following me. I don't know how to explain the feeling that the chanting given us, but it was truly evil. By the time we got up there, the chanting was gone and we said, "Did you guys hear that?" Obviously in a very freaked out voice, and they all heard it, and not seconds later, it started again. So the 5 of us are out here peering into the woods, listening to this chanting that would sometimes sound far away, then relatively close, all male voices in the weirdest language I don't understand, sounding like a strange extreme church. Then following the chanting, a loud bang like somebody whacked a huge piece of metal, a man wailing like in extreme pain. All of the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My brother and I were then staring at each other in a mixture of scared excitement and horror. The wailing stopped, and then it was back to chanting that eventually dies out. I was so freaked out by it I want to call the cops, because whoever was screaming is in a lot of pain. That mixed with the weird chanting just made me think that something terrifying gone on. One friend tried to say it had to be some drunk guys, but this can't be. Now, no, I didn't call the cops, and I would have, but honestly, the forest was so large that it'd be very difficult to locate exactly where the sounds were coming from. We went in and got some of the others, but by the time they came out, the chanting had stopped. Someone wanted to go and explore, but obviously that's a bad idea. After that, I was so ready to go home. I can't explain how scared I was, and the feeling driving home was one that I'll never forget. It felt so wrong and evil. I can only imagine it was some weird occultists in the woods. Last year, I was backpacking in the deep mountains in Montana. I was nearby Libby Mountain, about 3 hours west of Glacier National Park. I was hiking alone and expected to encounter bears, grizzlies, mooses, etc. I am an experienced person with this and know how to handle them, so I'm not really worried. But this time, I was way out in the middle of nowhere with no one around for miles. Also, no cell service anywhere. And I didn't have my emergency beacon with me. Usually, I expect to see other hikers on the trail, but here none. I'm completely alone and know it. Well, it was like 9 miles to my camp at the Upper Cedar Lake. About half a mile away, the trail actually opened up and into a somewhat clearing and has great visibility around me. There were still trees and undergrowth covering the ground. A few minutes later, I see something scurrying across the trail maybe 50 feet ahead of me. I stop, froze, and wait. The creature noticed me and stood up into the undergrowth, but still almost covered by tall grass. It was about 3 feet tall, pitch black, and about 60 pounds, but obviously intelligent and quick. I assume it's a baby bear, so I don't move or make sound. I got my bear spray ready, fully expecting angry mama bear to come at me, but that didn't happen, because I would have surely been attacked or at least bluff charged at. Although I can't see its face through the grass, the creature stared at me invasively for 30 seconds. I don't move a muscle. Then suddenly, it huffed loudly at me, then ran through the grass to the side of the hill, and I never see it again. The sound it made was a lot like a deeper sound than you can expect from something small, like a bear's growl. I stood there silently waiting for a few minutes to see if the mum bear came, but it never did. One of the weirdest things that ever happened to me as a search and rescue person was one day we got a call out in the snow. We had a call out to go and rescue a man who went missing on a hiking trail out in the forest. Now I set off to search in the area designated to me. I have everything with me. The radio communication's very good, and I find some footsteps. Great. I go to radio this in to the other workers, but as I do, my radio dies. I go to turn on my flashlight, and this is struggling too. I call out quickly for anyone but get no reply. The snow's picking up a bit now. I decide the best thing to do is quickly follow the footsteps and see if it's the person we need, get them out of there and try and get radio signal on a hill. As I'm following the footsteps, I get a strange feeling that I'm being followed that I've never felt before. It's odd because obviously when you're looking for someone it's quite the opposite. What's worse is I go to flick on my flashlight and it's died now. I switch in some new batteries and this doesn't work again too, which is really odd. It's something I've never experienced before or since. I keep following the footsteps until suddenly I realise they just stop. Now it's strange because there's literally nothing around. No other snow's disturbed whatsoever. It's like whatever this thing was just vanished. Just as I'm standing there, the feeling that I'm being followed is unbearable. And for 2 seconds I can hear voices all around me that stop just as soon as they start. I realise this isn't what we're looking for and I quickly sprint back the way I've come. I'm still looking around but I don't see any signs of anyone. Just as I get back to where I started, I can hear my radio coming to life. We found him. We got him. I radio in, oh that's great, I was just following the footsteps. Where are you guys? And when they reveal their location to me, my heart drops. They're 3 miles away from me. They say the man's alive and well. And to this day, I have no idea what them footsteps were or why they stopped suddenly. My team investigated the whole area just to see if anyone else was lost there, but there was no one. Now I work as an emergency technician, and I had one call out that I'm never going to forget in the woods. Apparently there was a fire, and people could hear screams of people. Now, of course to me that means I'm going to have to go and deal with some either potentially really hurt people or dead people, so I'm not really looking forward to this one. We eventually dismount from our vehicle, and I have all my gear with me. I run to the area where I can hear the screams next to where the fire was, but there's no one to be seen. I can hear the screams and shout out, "I'm an emergency medic, what's wrong?" The second I do that, all of the screams stop, and it's dead silent. I can just hear the police sirens in the distance as some more support arrives. I look at my colleague and he's gone pale. Paler than I've ever seen him before. We search for hours with the police but can't find anyone or anything. Turns out nobody was hurt from the fire at all, but why could we hear screams like this? To this day I still don't understand what happened. Me and my brother always liked to go exploring the deep woods. Now it probably wasn't the best of ideas, but we didn't have to go very far on the bus to reach a really good forest that we could go into. It was almost like a jungle. The grass was almost as tall as I was, it felt like, and my brother was always there with me to enjoy it. Now there was one particular night that I'm never going to forget when we went investigating. We knew we couldn't be out for too long in case it got dark, and my brother says that he wants to go and explore something on the side and just to wait here. I say sure and let him go. Well, thinking it might be a game, I quickly got up and sprinted after my brother. I sprint for what feels like an eternity and realise that I'm now lost. Just as I do that, I hear a voice scream out, "Don't take another step forward." I'm frozen and don't know who's called this to me. I'm scared now and run backwards calling out for my brother. I quickly make it up the tree to see what's happened, and I can't see my brother. Then I look up and to my horror, there must be a 50 feet drop just ahead of where I was, completely hidden by the grass. If I took another step forward, I would have fell to my death. It was only when I got older that I realised just how dangerous this is, and I quickly hurried down the tree, and eventually am reunited with my brother. I told him what happened and he's absolutely furious at me, but more angry at himself for going off too far to hear what happened. We never went back to them woods again, and I'm just thankful that I survived that day. But to this day, I have no idea what called out to me or who it was. Maybe it was my subconscious somehow saving me, or the paranormal. I don't know. About 10 or 15 years ago, a buddy of mine and I were camping in the Wenatchee area of the Olympic National Forest, south of the Olympic National Park. We found a remote site that was fairly isolated, about as far into the wilderness as you can still get a vehicle. My buddy and I camped out about once a month back in these days. We were looking for Bigfoot evidence and whatnot. Our second night was by far the most eventful, where we're sitting at the campfire and I think I hear noises. I hear faint singing, mostly ones in upper registers, like the choir of females. It was very faint, but I can definitely hear it, and it seems to be getting louder to me. I figured it wasn't the wind playing tricks. However, I kept hearing it every few minutes and it's getting louder. Finally, my friend heard it too. We eventually pluck up some courage and manage to investigate what's happening. Now, we did a circle search pattern and found out it was coming from the road. We walked down to the road nearest to the campsite, which is about 300 yards away, and find an old church with a group of children all singing rhythmic church rhymes. The church has a small van that you can actually see just parked outside. I wave hi, and nobody responds to me. I don't understand why they're doing it at this time, especially out in the middle of nowhere. I don't want to call it a cult, but I have no idea what it is to this day. Needless to say, we quickly got out of there. A little over a decade ago, I met and started dating a girl who lived in Tolan Country, Connecticut, so I hauled up from way down south for a visit. I know it's a bad idea to cross, maybe in this case, state lines for a relationship, but I'm in my early 20s. So at any rate, perhaps the one thing I found that took away from all that was said is involving a parking lot in the country of Connecticut. Here in the south, at least, we tend to think of up north as big cities and industry. I was honestly surprised when I got to her place. It's in the woods with rolling hills, and even the distant moaning of cows. Now, I can't exactly say what, despite all this familiar terrain, was going on, but something felt inherently different. This isn't something I can outright put to words, but there was something that enchanted me about the northern wilderness. I had to drink it in as much as I could. I spent a lot of time dragging her through the brush. We explored some abandoned mills, found an odd ring of chairs in a clearing, and just generally frolicked and had a good time during our journey. Except this one place we found. I don't know exactly what it is, maybe an old theatre or a roller skate rink. All I can remember that it is painted black, and there are these murals of outer space scenes like flaming comets and UFOs and whatnot, maybe from the 60s or 70s. I might be wrong. Now, I'm a seasoned explorer of the abandoned. I even went into the so-called Devil House of the Falkland at night, alone in parts of it, and don't flinch, so I'm used to strange things. I think you can't really live in the country that much and not have a tale of one or two things that doesn't add up. The place bugged me out. It wasn't anything stereotypical like a cold feeling or an intense sort of dread. It was more a feeling that something's wrong, out of place, even though we're there, exploring and it's a date. Here's the thing, I want to go in. I wish I did, but I simply couldn't even try. Something about the thing was so foreign and off that I couldn't compel myself to do anything but turn back, and that's what I did. I've never experienced anything like this in my life, but I have a feeling there was either bad people in there or something bad had happened. I'd like to go back one day to find out, but this just seems really odd, especially the fact that there's nothing else around it too. My friends and I were camping out in the woods one day when we realised that there's a light off in the distance. Originally we thought that maybe it was a star, but we realised that it's actually moving down too quick and it's below the tree line. We're not sure what this is, so we signal back to it with our flashlight and call out, but there's no reply. Now that's a little odd. Now we're not too worried initially, but we can hear a heavy breathing coming from that direction. We do the same again and realise that it's coming towards us very quickly now. Just as I turn to my buddy to say that this doesn't feel good, I hear a blood-curdling scream that I've never heard before. It didn't sound human, and now whatever the light was bolting towards us. We quickly gathered up the things we needed, leaving our campsite behind, and bolted to my buddy's car. I quickly glance behind and I can see that this light is still following us. It's not even going towards the campsite now, it's going directly towards us. My buddy slams on the accelerator and I can see that thing still chasing us, but stopping just before the road. I have no idea who or what this was, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I've lived in Southern California my entire life. If you know anything about California, it's very diverse. Up north is filled with mountains and trees, and the south is a lot more, well, city-like. This summer, I decided to take a trip to Tahoe. It's a beautiful place and my first time being upstate. I'm going to chop this story up into segments so it's easier to read. On day 1, I settle into the cabin around 5 PM. After an 8-hour drive, I'm really tired. I went and lay down in the bed that was in the loft. It was quiet. It was like being in a different world. I was so used to cars zooming by it and people talking right outside my home. But this is quiet and it's peaceful. I managed to fall asleep fairly quickly. Now, around 4 hours into my sleep, I'm jerked up and I look around for a bit and I hear some tapping sounds. It's really strange. I look around to see where it's coming from, but to no avail. It sounded like somebody's tapping on the window part of the back door. I figure I'm being paranoid and fell back to sleep. Day 2. Nothing really happens and I fall asleep fine. Day 3. I wake up early in the morning, maybe 4. I heard a crash coming from the attic ladder. That's placed conveniently right behind the couch I'm sleeping on. I didn't move. I can hear a few footsteps. Now, you know the feeling when somebody's staring at you? That's how I feel. I'm on my side staring straight ahead. Suddenly, I felt like somebody or something crawls over me. I felt their 2 hands on either side of me. And I knew if their face was only inches away from mine, I should be able to see them. Now I'm facing straight ahead, and I'm not really going to turn to see who it is if they're actually there. Now they stay there for what feels like forever, until I felt them crawl backwards off of the couch, and I heard the dog let out a muffled bark, in which somebody shushed her, then let out a good yell. The presence stayed there for what feels like an eternity, till I heard the footsteps going out the back door. Still, I didn't move. I'm paralysed with fear. Needless to say, I didn't go back to sleep. I checked on my friends a bit later when I felt the coast is clear. None of them had left their rooms that night. I told them my experience and they said that I was being paranoid. I halfway agreed with them, and our day went out as planned. Now, later that day on day 3, after a day at the lake with my friends, we come back to the quiet and cozy cabin. The caretakers of the cabin told us that there's a river a bit further back into the woods, maybe a 15-minute walk away. My friends and I decided to stay back and rest, so I took some bug spray, a small backpack with snacks and my phone. It was pretty straightforward. There was tall grasses on either sides of the trail. It was a thin path, but pretty easy to navigate. When I got to the riverbank, there were 2 picnic tables. I didn't want to get eaten by mosquitoes, but I stupidly wore sandals. I put my bag on the table and started my walk back to the cabin. For some odd reason, the path seems distorted. What was once a straightforward trail was now covered in rough terrain. I noticed that the tall grass on the side of the path has been disturbed. It's like something huge, gigantic, had walked across the grass. I think maybe it's a bear, since the locals told us that bears were a problem at this time of year, but the sheer size of it made me second guess that. I was a bit taken back by this. However, I continued and made it back to the cabin, and then back to the river. I was a little frightened now. I kept telling myself I'm just freaking out and I should enjoy the nature. I sat down at one of the tables and watched the river. After a while, I felt like there was something staring at me. I looked around, assuming one of my friends was on their ways to prank me, but there was no one. Across the river, I noticed a bit of brush that was shaken up. There was a clearing in the bushes that was fenced off by 2 logs in an X shape. The longer I sat in the spot, the more worried I got. I couldn't help but feel like there was something right behind the thick brush that I couldn't see. I went down the river hoping to come across something, but nothing. No fish, no frogs or roads, just mosquitoes, and a bunch of them at that. Disappointed with the lack of anything. Really, I just went to sit back at the table, and that's when I heard it. It was a noise I can't describe. It's a scream and a gurgle, as if whatever it was had a mouthful of water. It's completely inhuman. I froze. In the moment I should have been running for my life, but I freeze. I heard rustling in the bushes behind me, the ones I was worried about earlier. Then again, the scream. It's the loudest thing I ever heard. I run. I sprint through the forest. What should have been a quick trip back to the cabin was anything but. After about 10 minutes of sprinting, I notice I'm lost. I stop for a few moments, frantic, trying to see if I can find anything that looks familiar. I saw a bridge that I'd crossed on my way there, and I started sprinting. I thought to myself, why didn't the damn thing kill me? I had stopped for a good minute now, but I could hear it chasing me. It was a game for the thing. I can't explain it any differently. Every time I stopped, it would as well. I finally made it back to the cabin, and instead of going inside, I stood on the porch, faced the forest and cried. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary, but I knew it was still out there. I didn't want to turn my back, so I sat there for hours silently crying, occasionally checking my phone, and well, writing this, I don't have any idea what actually happened. There's nothing I can compare it to other than maybe a Wendigo. All I know is that I'm not going to be going back to that river again. If anyone has any idea what happened, please let me know, because it really haunts me to this day. Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today. Make sure you check out my Instagram at Joe the Insomniac and the podcast in the description below. And there's a message before the video starts, so if you want to go straight to the stories, then there's timestamps in the description below for that. So for today I'd like to share this. If you feel like you might have a problem, make sure you go and get some help for it. You might not know exactly what issue you have, and you might not understand it entirely, but that's fine. Even if you just have a theory that you might have something wrong in terms of mental health conditions or anything, and you think you could get better with it, make sure you go out there and get some help and therapy, because it might be a way bigger issue than you realize it is, and you'll see afterwards how much different and better your life can be, because it may have become normal for you. But you might not realize that that's actually suffering in a way. I had it before with anxiety, where I just thought I was naturally anxious, but I didn't realize I shouldn't have lived in the world of anxiety that I did until later. So make sure you're mindful of that. I hope you all enjoyed these stories and take care. I'll talk to you all soon. Where I lived, we had relatively few COVID cases. They were almost none at all. Now, because of that, although we're still living under certain restrictions, we had more public health sanctioned freedoms than many other places. For example, at that time, we're permitted to share our social bubble with another household. My family and our fellow bubble family decided to take advantage of it by going on a full getaway. We rented 2 cabins side by side in a beautiful waterfront wooded area and had a lovely relaxing weekend. Although there were other cabins nearby, most were not occupied, and we saw no other people, though we did hear a dog barking a few times somewhere not far off. Now on the final night there, my son decided to sleep in the other cabin with his bubble siblings. Around 11 PM, he called over, asking for something he'd forgotten. It was a very dark night, and there were certainly no streetlights in the deeply wooded cabin area, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked the short distance to the cabin. I want to know what he needs. On the walk back, I hear a whistle. It was a very human sounding whistle, exactly like the kind of whistle one makes to a dog. It sounded very close, but shining my light around I see no one. I heard it again, and assumed somebody was whistling for the dogs we'd heard earlier, so I don't think much of it. A short time later, another call came from the front door. My son couldn't settle and wanted to come back to our cabin. This time, my husband and I walked over, collected our child and his stuff, said goodnight to our bubble family and walked back. We heard the same whistle again several times. It seemed to be on the dirt road ahead of us, gradually moving away. My husband commented that the dog must have gotten loose and the owner was looking for it. Inside of our cabin, we continued hearing the whistle, coming at irregular intervals of maybe 2 to 4 minutes. At first, we heard it very loud and nearby, then eventually it would get further. Now, eventually it's out of earshot. Then it would seem to circle around and start again from another direction, basically circling the cabin. Still thinking not much of it, my husband climbed into the loft to go and sleep. It's funny. While I started to pack for the trip the next day, our son was sleeping in a little room on the main floor to the left of the front door, and the small window in his room was cracked open, just a bit to let in some unseasonably warm night air. I was standing by that window, quietly gathering his scattered things, whilst the whistle comes again and drew closer. But this time, instead of fading, it actually comes very close and is an incredibly loud whistle. It's now by my son's window. The blind was down, but I was sure somebody was on the front porch outside. I leapt to the front door, flung it open, and threw on the porch light, ready to tell off some prankster, but no one was there. I grabbed my flashlight and took a few steps out past the circle of light, then thought better of it and retreat. I locked up the cabin, closed the latch all the way down, and the window and the blinds. If somebody was creeping around our cabin, I didn't want them looking into us from the darkness. Deciding that I did not want to leave my son sleeping downstairs alone, I settle on the sofa with a book, but the whistling continues. Between each one, I would convince myself it's a bird, but it would be more human and I would be more certain of that. The irregularity of it grew because it has slight variations in pitch, telling me that this is not mechanical or automated. Around 1:30, my husband suddenly got up and starts to get dressed. I asked him where he was going. He said, "I'm going to find out whoever's been whistling for hours." Horrified. My husband's a pretty big guy, and I was as curious as he was, but I also felt deep into my bones that it would not be safe to let him go outside that night. I insisted that he goes back to bed, and thankfully he does. I sat vigil, listening to the intermittent whistles for at least another hour. When I woke up in the morning, the sun was peeking around the blinds and the whistling had stopped. I cautiously peered outside, half expecting to see some sort of evidence of a nighttime intruder, but there were none. A little while later we wandered the next door, coffee mugs in hand, to go to our friends to get their take. Amazingly, they didn't hear a thing, despite the fact that the sound was so audible and would have gone right past them. We can't understand how they didn't actually hear it. At a checkout, I asked a woman at the kiosk down the road about it. She just looked at me strangely and said she didn't know what it could have been. When I got home, I searched the audios of the bird calls in the area, then ones not common to the area, in hope of finding that same whistle again. Nothing I found was close, and I still don't know what we heard that night. It terrifies me. Now, to start with, none of my family actually believe in the paranormal, including myself really, but no one can explain this road. My maternal family live in the northeast of Scotland in a tiny wee village on the peninsula called the Black Isle. Now, the village itself has some creepy places. There's the Pirate's Graveyard, so named because of the 17th century gravestones that are now enamelized with a skull and crossbone. There's McFarquez Bay. This is a site where different smugglers would actually use flashlights as they thought they were at a lighthouse, and this actually led to a shipwreck. The smugglers would then use the cave situated around the village to hide their stashes. Lastly, there's the old stables, situated halfway up a steep hill just after the Pirate's Graveyard. Now, the only reason I found this place creepy is because when I was there, a lot younger than now, they had some exceptionally strange art exhibitions on the lawn. If you've ever seen the reflective sculptures in the Scottish woodlands, you know the kind of nope that I'm talking about. Some of these places have a creepy feeling when you're there, but just a creepy feeling as when you're telling the same scary story when you're at a campfire. That's not the same as what happened on the road. There are two roads into the village, one along the coast and the other through some beautiful wooded area known as the Fairy Glen. Different to the Fairy Glen than the one on the Isle of Skye. Apparently, we're not always inventive with names, but I adore the Fairy Glen. Some of my best childhood memories are walking through the woods there. There's a waterfall at the end of the short hike where we'd bring a picnic and leave some food for the fairies. As a rule, my grandfather always said that whenever you drove past the Fairy Glen, you have to say hello to the different fairies there. But anyway, back to the road. If you take the road to the village past the Fairy Glen, there's a fork, the Athane Road, a picturesque, winding roads taking you past the farmsteads and rugged views, even a beach where you can find fossils of anemones and some actual Jurassic fossils, which is quite cool. So we drive in often by daytime, but never at night. For the record, I have never been on the road at night before. Out of curiosity, I peeked to the fork where you can divert, but My family's story always sends chills down my spine. I see the sign for the Efane Road at night, even in the Scottish summer when it's light until 11 PM, and I can't make the turn. The first story is from my grandpa, a Scot-Glaswegian atheist. He drove the road at night 3 times as a change of scenery from the usual drive. The first time though, he saw a beautiful light, orb shining over the trees, said he'd rarely felt as calm as he did then when he saw them. The next time, he excused as just being tired, but I don't know. A young girl apparently appeared in the back of the car seat. He drove for a few miles down the road and dropped her off at a path to one of the farms. Once he'd dropped her off, he felt a strange sense of dread and sped all the way home, and this feeling didn't go away until he got back. He never had that feeling before. The last time he ever drove the road was one autumn. It can get dark quickly in Scotland, and he found himself in the pitch black on the road, with a pale face staring at him through the window. It stayed with him until we turned back onto the main road to the village. My auntie and mum actually both had very similar experiences, where a face was at different points in time. Both had boyfriends that thought the road was very weird, but a load of nonsense. All involved had a figure and face follow them off the road to the end of the path. One of the uncles saw the same light as my grandfather. Another uncle saw a hitchhiker dressed in a posh suit, but wearing clown shoes. As my uncle slowed, the hitchhiker turned and given him an inhuman grin with too many teeth, literally ear to ear. It had no eyes that he could see. It didn't look like makeup. My uncle sped all the way home. I don't know what's up with that road, but I know for a fact that I'm never gonna go there by myself, especially not at night time. This happened when I was a teenager, and it still makes me shiver when I think about it. During the early 90s, I used to camp in Wicklow Mountains quite often. For those of you who don't know, Wicklow is quite a large national park on the outskirts of Dublin, Ireland. It's not huge by international standards, but it is big. I mean, big enough to get lost in. Bodies are unearthed from there from time to time, often as a result of a drug deal gone wrong, or because of a family dispute. Without specific information, there is no way that the police could find a missing person in all of those acres of pine forest. In 2017, an army search team found the scattered remains of a person at 8 locations along an isolated 20-kilometer stretch of road running through the mountains. A power tool had been used to dismember the body. Other people have gone missing after they accepted lifts from strangers, never to be seen alive again. Anyway, back to the story. During the summer, me and a group of school friends used to head off into the woods. When the weather was very warm, we even made our own tents out of pine branches slung across a frame. We never had trouble from the locals. That was, of course, apart from the summer of '92. I was with a group of inner city lads who were a little tougher than my other friends. As if the location was not scary enough, the place where we set up our camp was called the Devil's Glen. It was a heavily wooded area with some broad leaf trees, but there's quite a lot of campfires. It gets very dark once you get into the woods. You also get a lot of deer up there. They can be a hazard to traffic, but you don't really meet anyone. I mean, apart from loggers or the occasional day trippers. It's pretty isolated. We had tents with us, but none of us were properly equipped for the outdoors. After we set up camp, we decided to visit the local town, really just a couple of shops along a main road, and on our way back, some of the gang stole lighter fluid so we can get a fire going. That night, we drank ciders in the woods around a roaring fire as night drew. It begins to rain, lightly at first, but then more heavier. I remembered lying on the ground outside of my tent because I'm a bit drunk. Just then, I can hear what sounds like monks chant far off into the trees. The forest closed in all around us, in all directions. We can't figure out where the chanting's coming from. It sounded exactly like the Georgian chant, but there's something very unsettling about it. Something evil, and we start getting very scared. We're just a group of kids from the inner city, and this is before mobile phones. The sound gets closer. At one point, it sounded as though it's surrounding us. I remember my brother screaming to me, who was with us, panicking, "Get him back inside now," dragging me inside. The lads stamped down the fire. A hush now falls over the campsite. At first, we begin to hear what sounds like muffled footsteps approaching. They're very difficult to make out because of the soft pine needles surrounding us, and given the noise we made earlier, they probably didn't belong to animals. Eventually, it's very obvious to all of us what's going on. In the darkness, we could just about make out the shapes of people silently filing past our campsite before they vanish into the trees. The following morning, we set out to investigate. Our walks led us onto a little used tar road near the camp. Scrawled into the surface are pentagrams and other symbols of devil worship. Needless to say, we get out of there. The following year, some of the group go back, including my brother. They get chased out of the woods by men with dogs, and they end up having to walk back to Dublin. Just a few years after our camping trip, a shocking story about Devil's Glen made it into the newspaper. A girl had been handcuffed to a tree and assaulted by a group of men. She was only freed when her cries were heard by locals. Another middle-aged man was abducted, spending 4 days tied to a tree. When he was eventually found, he was close to death. He even spent time in intensive care. Afterwards, the newspapers carried the stories with headlines like, "The mountains where no one will hear you scream." To be honest, given the number of people that have gone missing in the Wicklow Mountains, I now think we were all very lucky. What probably saved us that night in '92 is that we're in a large group. I shudder to think what might have happened had I been there alone. I still have no idea what's going on in the Devil's Glen. I hope I never find out. So this happened to a couple of friends and me about 6 years ago. The first summer, we're all back from college. We've been hooligan kids who gotten into weed a little in college. We decided to go to the state park near one of my friend's houses late at night to smoke. For the sake of the story, I'll give you a layout. We parked at the end of this dead end on a wooded road where a path started that led into the park from the back. The park is heavily wooded, with a lake and some recreational areas on the side with the main entrance. The path we're on went parallel to the edge of a large field, with a couple of yards of trees between. A little ways down there was a small gap to access the field. We had stopped in the big field next to the tree line near the gap that led back to the path we walked on. There was a rock there, and my friend began to use it to prepare the fun stuff. It was a really cloudy night, and the only things we could see were what lit up with our phones. After a couple of minutes, we hear something moving in the trees, maybe 30 feet away. I've always been overly paranoid and insisted that the worst is gonna happen, but my friend says it's a squirrel. A minute later, we hear it again, closer and louder. I say sounds kinda heavy, you think it's a deer, more to calm myself down. Maybe, one of them says. That's when the sound picks up. We all froze, put our lights away. We had all grown up in wooded areas and spent a lot of time hiking and whatever else. We know it sounds like when someone is walking in the woods, or what that should sound like. If it was a person, they were walking slow, and they're way closer than I would have preferred, walking in an unnatural manner. That's already got to me. What animal would walk towards people, not away from them? I get a surge of anxiety and kind of blurted out it sounds like a person. On cue, whoever it was starts running at us through the trees, and one of my friends yells at us to run. We do. We all start running full speed across the tall field of grass, and the whole time we hear the guy running behind us. A minute of running brought us all to a tall rock that's there to prevent the floor from flooding, and began to climb furiously, tripping and scrambling over the rocks to the other side, and run into the woods that ran next to the road we're parked on. We got a little way in, sat in the dark together, absolutely still and silent. We hear nothing though, but don't break our silence or move a muscle for about half an hour. Then we creep through the edge of the road, unfortunately a ways past my friend's car. After 5 more minutes of building the courage, we ran. We waited for my friend to unlock his door so he could unlock the back one and got the heck out of there. However, when my friend began to pack up and his headlights lit a little way into the path in front of us, we caught a shadow figure of somebody walking right back down that path. So it's now confirmed that it was no squirrel or animal that chased us. It was someone, and God knows what their intentions were. I hate the fact that they're on their own, and there's a group of us, and they're completely unfazed by the numbers difference. Clearly they had bad intentions, whoever they were. I'm just glad that I didn't have to find out for myself firsthand. This isn't my story, but it happened to my friend. Let's call him John, for anonymity purposes. He's a big hunter. This happened in his backyard yesterday. He has a pretty big backyard, and it has a small lake that's of decent size. At the edge of his yard is where the forest begins, and about 50 yards in, he hunts deer, and naturally, he has a deer set up. He was on vacation for a football championship when he came home yesterday and was checking the camera. He was scrolling through and it was deer, deer and more deer. Then a little girl. The girl had her head down and was holding a doll. She had a big coat on and you couldn't see her face, but she was facing the camera. In the next picture, her forehead was up against the top of the camera and she's just staring into it. She had big brown eyes, literally just staring. In the photo after that, It was the same little girl again, but this time, there was an older man. Not old, but maybe middle-aged. He was holding a shovel and what appears to be an axe, looking at the camera with the girl. Then the pictures ended. Those are the last ones. I will update if I get more information, but he said this just happened to him yesterday night. I really hope there's no bad news to come from this. I used to be part of search and rescue for Parks Canada, but that all changed after something I experienced in the foothills 3 years ago. The horror I witnessed truly contrasted the beauty of the surrounding primal landscape. There is something special about this land which is difficult to explain. It's so peaceful. This whole area was considered to be a sacred place by the Aboriginal people. The area is predominantly inhabited by the mighty buffalo, grizzly bears, wolves and mountain lions, among other prestigious animals. But there is something else that inhabits this land, something that has gone unseen for an incomprehensible amount of time. Dare I say that this thing must have witnessed a millennial go by. For all intents and purposes, I call it a vampire. I don't mean a Wendigo, and I don't mean a pale man with slick back hair and a black cape with an Eastern European accent. In a way, this thing seemed like a force that has gone unseen in the wilderness, feeding off the unwary travellers. What it does to its prey is not unlike anything I've ever seen before in nature. It's worse. It feeds like a parasite to continue its existence. This, of course, is me trying to make some kind of sense of what I've witnessed, to have some kind of grasp on the situation, to keep things in order. That year was chaos due to severe electrical storms that caused multiple forest fires, some of which were under control, while others caused massive damage in other areas. Health advisory services were recommended anyone with existing health issues to remain indoors and avoid all strenuous activity. But even that didn't keep the most rugged or most determined outdoorsy men away. Oftentimes, the sky was hazy, with billowing smoke that went on for miles and miles being carried by the wind. There were also fire bans put in place. Anyone caught with a fire at a campsite, or even a fire pit in their backyard, could get a massive fine. Let me tell you about that day. Normally, it would have been a bright sunny day, typical of the season during that time of year. However, the sunlight was blotted out by the heavy smoke that arrived downwards. The trouble started during the middle of the summer that year when a park ranger came across a reserved campsite that was in ruins. There was debris scattered all around the site. The tents had been shredded open, and one was even completely collapsed. The car windows were smashed in, the roof had been torn open. The wreckage clearly showed that some kind of struggle had gone on there during the night. As it turned out, there was a family of 4 that had been using the campsite. It was a father and mother with 2 daughters. The ranger determined that it was likely a bear attack. He called in for backup. The RT and P were called in to the scene alongside search and rescue teams, and a massive search and rescue for the family was commenced. The group I was with was about 10 miles south away from the campsite. This is how far out the scent dogs brought us, but still, there's zero sign of the family at all. How in the hell did we come all this way without finding anything? I mean, no blood, No objects, not even clothing. Heck, there weren't even any footprints in the dirt besides deer tracks. The area we ended up in was thick brush, dominated by boarding spruce trees and rocky cliffs. The canines began acting up, but they began whining and howling with fright, tucking their tails in between their legs, even hiding behind the dog handlers trying to control them. This is highly unusual. It's like they either saw or caught sense of something they didn't like. But what was it? I saw several meters behind the group some people who were arguing about the dogs and which direction to go in. I kept glancing around because I felt anxious. Despite the summer heat, I had that strange sensation of someone walking over my grave. Do you know what I mean? My body shivering, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up on end, and goosebumps formed on my skin. There's another feeling too, the distinct feeling of being watched. I spun around looking in every direction, looking at the trees and rocks, but there was nothing of note to see. What happened next I cannot truly explain. It was against procedure, but I felt compelled to start moving towards an overgrown hiking trail in the southeast. I felt like I was being pulled by some unseen force. I just felt the need. Maybe I wanted to get away from the search and rescue members who were arguing over the tracking dogs going wild. Beyond the thick brush, I discovered a cave entrance in the ground. At the cave mouth, I spotted something bright. It was a child's-sized shoe, with pink stripes on the side of it. I felt my heart sink to my chest. I looked up at the smoky sky and let out a sigh. I noticed an opening in the dark hazy sky and a beam of sunlight hit me. I snapped out of it and grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the ground. The sloping ground showed signs of something being dragged downwards. I let out a whimper as I entered the cave. I knew there was something in there. I knew there were caves here, but I had never entered alone. But, as I stated, I felt like something was calling me. This is something I still can't describe to this day. I had to crab walk through the entrance, but when I reached the flat ground, I could finally stand upright. 20 feet into the cave, the stagnant air took a hold of the darkness, which was becoming oppressive, but I continued pushing downwards. I stopped and listened very carefully. There was complete silence in the unforgiving darkness. I shined the light down around the cavern and spotted something on the wall. It's an ancient petroglyph carved into the wall. I've never seen that before. It depicted men chasing a buffalo herd off a cliff. I tranced my finger along the primitive art. Pushing onwards into the unknown, I found an object on the cavern floor. It was what appeared to be a very old leather canvas bag. I picked it up and blew the dust off of it. I unbuck it and take a look inside. There's a rusty water canteen, a bronze compass, a leather-bound book, and to my surprise, a very old-looking pistol. I dropped to my knees and grabbed the book out of the bag. The writing on the cover read, "Le Demon." I remained still on my knees, trying to comprehend what I was seeing, trying to make sense when a noise startled me. It didn't sound like it was right next to me, but rather it came from somewhere deeper in the cave. It sounded like something being broken or snapped. I continued my search for the missing family. They had to be down there. The glow of the flashlight showed that I had to make my way down another slope. Oh. But at the bottom, I saw something that causes me to freeze. I saw a pair of feet, one barefoot, one missing a shoe. The other was wearing a white shoe with pink stripes. Tears begin to well up in my eyes, and complete sadness has taken over. I had indeed found one of the missing family members, a young girl that couldn't have been older than mine. I gasped in horror of what I saw. First was the look of complete terror frozen onto her face. Those were horrible wounds on her necks and arms. She's completely pale, as all the life and blood has been drained from her. My heart was beating like a jackhammer. I began having difficulty breathing. I began to shake. My fingers are numb. There was more damage than just what appeared to be bite marks. Her head's at a weird angle. The cold indifference of the universe blasted in my mind, and I began to cry uncontrollably. I frantically reached for the only thing I could use to defend myself, something that works against animals, my flare gun. If there was some kind of animal down there, I knew I could scare it at least, I think. A shuffling sound caused me to back up against a tunnel wall. There was something in there with me. Nausea began to take a hold of me, and my mind felt as though it was swirling. I was feeling cold, but sweat was running down my face, telling the opposite. With my hands trembling, I summoned the courage I have to move the flashlight to the direction of the source of sound, my sanity now holding on for dear life. And when I saw the thing, I thought I was gonna die right on the spot. The very sight of the being, the very knowledge that this creature exists, reaches straight into the deepest depths of my psyche, right down into the primal fear that exists in all living things. I wanted to retreat, but I couldn't. This is what I saw in that dark cave system. Have you ever read a National Geographic magazine or watched a Discovery Channel? If you have, you are probably familiar with Otzi the Iceman, the man whose frozen corpse was found in a glacier, having been there for thousands of years in the Alps. This is what I could compare this being to. Its leathery discoloured skin was pulled tight to its skeletal frame. The mouth is filled with yellow teeth. In fact, its mouth and chest are smeared in blood. The thing's not even looking at me. It was crouched on the top of the bodies that belonged to the rest of the missing family. The mother and daughter had their throats torn apart. On top of the pile directly beneath the creature was the father. Its eyes are closed. I'm really not sure if I'm dreaming now. It now emits a strange sound while slowly turning its head towards me. Its eyes snapped open. The eyes appear pure black, probably because of the darkness. This thing just appears to be an ancient vampire, but it can't be true. Strange thoughts race through my mind, like where did it come from? Am I having stress-induced psychosis, or is this actually here? In my mind, I'm starting to slip, as it began to stand upright and continue towards me, continuing to make the strange sound. The flare gun, I point directly at it, pulling the trigger. There's a very loud bang and the entire cave is lit up. It's honestly nearly blinding and deafening simultaneously. This thing is gonna kill me. I start running as fast as I could. My body was scraping against the cavern walls. I could see daylight just ahead of the cave entrance. I crawled up it as fast as I could, pushing my body to its limits. I spilled out onto the surface area, facing a bright blue sunny sky. The smoke had finally cleared, at least for now. The spruce trees gently swayed in the wind overhead. I clumsily get up onto my feet and backed away from the entrance to the cave. The creature never emerges from the darkness. I could just make out a set of glowing red orbs from the darkness. I know it's that creature. The rest of the team hurried through the brush to come and find me in shock. I told them I found the family down there. I told them what was down there, and armed policemen and park rangers went down there to get the remains of the family, but there's no signs of what killed them. I quit the very next day. No one believed me. The weirdest thing that ever happened to me was when I was 14 and camping with some of my friends. I was camping in my own tent. I went to a military store and got a really cool US Army tent with a big star on the side of it. Man, I loved that thing, but I digress. So we're out in a national park near where we all live. I'm a bit away from my friends. Now, as I'm sleeping, I'm awoken by the sound of rustling. Just as I'm about to get up to investigate what's happening, I see the silhouette of a man and I drop down. Now, stupid for me, I have a screen open and I can see through it. I get the fright of my life as this homeless looking person presses his face right up against the screen. He then screams at the absolute top of his lungs and runs off. What's worse is my friends don't believe me and think it's me playing a prank on them. I ended up digging a hole and sleeping half underground because I was so terrified he'd come back. Josie Twyman. Hi, I'm in Minal. You might not believe this. I'm shaking and sweating just typing this. For a while, after I moved out from my parents, I lived in a cabin right by the Dixie National Forest where there's endless acres of land. I spent most of my free time fishing, hiking, and my favourite thing to do is to get lost in the woods and find my way back by sundown. I have a habit of following animal tracks, but that led me to this tragedy. It was about midway through the spring. I set off into a new patch of dense woods. I found that I was on what appeared to be a coyote track. I followed them deep into the trees. It was still fairly cold, and as it got darker under the canopy, it felt below freezing. I was 4 hours into the hike when I noticed something is off. The planet life seemed to be dead and dying now. The birds and bugs are silent, yet still, there's faint tracks that I can still see just ahead, and I want to follow them. Then I stumbled upon it. The coyote. All I see is this black silhouette, and the glare of 3 beady eyes. I couldn't believe it. Time stood still. I can't breathe. I darted immediately into a hole in the ground by where it stood. I turned and ran as fast as I could. I ran and run sobbing. I thought it might have been a hallucination, but the eyes bored into my mind. All I can see is those eyes. I suddenly fell straight down into the dirt, exhausted. Everything's aching. The sun was setting. I need to get out. I was absolutely mortified. I made my way again, walking quickly, feeling as though I'm being watched, like an eternity, but soon I make it back to the cabin. Everything ached. I locked every door and the window and closed the blinds. After an hour or so of time has passed, I warm up over some leftover spaghetti. It was pretty terrible tasting, honestly, but before I went up to my bed in the loft, I ate a bowl of ice cream to treat myself for going through the stress that day. I turned off the lights and sat in my bed reading a book with a small little book light. Something felt very wrong, like eyes watching me. Every hair on my body was standing on end. I sat motionless for as long as I could. As I slowly turned my head to the window to look behind me, which had no blinds, I see it. 3 bright eyes shining, standing in the window right outside. It honestly felt as though somebody punched the wind out of my lungs. I hopped over the rail and landed down on the floor. I hit my side when I landed, scrambling into the guest room with no windows and locked the door. I curl up against the wall in the corner, wrapping a blanket around myself. I'd forgotten one thing. The cabin is slightly raised. You can still access under the trap door. The closet in that room. Man, I heard the scratching. It got closer. It honestly felt like it was enveloping over my entire body. From within the closet, I heard it. It climbed up through the door and was about to break out of the closet. I bust the door open, ran through the cabin into the Jeep. I turned the key and wait for the lights to turn on. Now I get this horrible smell like something's rotten. To my left, I see it. Jaws like a snake. I don't know if this is what people describe as a Wendigo, but I didn't take time to look. I drove until my gas was about to run out, and I made it to the closest town. I used up the remaining medical marijuana I had on me to get some rest. And when I woke up the next day as dawn broke, I continued driving all the way back to my folks' place. I put what happened aside, got my own apartment deep in the city, but in my sleep, I see the eyes. Every single night, I wake up sweating and shaking. The doctors say if I don't sleep, I risk serious health issues. Maybe it's just exhaustion-related delirium, but I could swear I heard the scratching outside my window again. I can only hope that it will leave me. Now to this day I don't know who done it or why, but I could have very easily died camping last week. I'm an avid hiker and mountaineer, so I love to be in the outdoors. That all changed though. There was a group of people who were acting suspicious, also hiking on the same trail as me. I thought nothing of them, and went to go and sleep one night, sure I was miles away from them. However, I'm awoken to the sound and smell of things burning. I look up and to my horror, there's a massive blaze around my campfire. These psychopaths have literally tried to set fire to my very own campground. I can see them laughing as I'm sprinting off into the distance, terrified. I called the police and park rangers and they said they've had a problem with people setting fire to things and they'll launch a full investigation. I still haven't heard anything back yet. The following happened when I was 12. It was the summer of 2003, and I was at my best friend's house for a birthday party who was also turning 12. I remember it was her, myself, and maybe like a handful of other kids around the same age playing at her rather large home, just being kids playing around, playing music and having fun. We were planning on having a slumber party, and we're all really excited to see Austin Powers and Goldmember at the movies. That afternoon, us kids got into my best friend's mum's car and went to a nearby dollar store to pick up a few fun toys to take back to her home. After we had the typical pizza and cake, we decided we got bored staying inside to go outside. My best friend's house is situated right next to a huge golf course, which meant that her backyard was essentially this ginormous golf course. It extended deep into the woods. I distinctly remembered us hanging out on the field, just being silly and playing games where we had to run around inside those sandy groove things of the course, as fast as we could without falling. At this point, the sky turned overcast and a few of us started to complain about getting bored and what we should do next. A few of us were kind of running around, but of course, you can only do that for so long. It started to drizzle and we decided to remain outdoors since it wasn't raining too heavily. I noticed the other side of our driveway and the house was a cul-de-sac where some new houses are being constructed. So me being a curious 12-year-old wanted to go and check it out since it was empty and there were no other cars there and I saw no workers or trucks or anything. I was checking out the new house when I looked inside the dark empty space. It was completely isolated until I heard what sounds like whistling. At that point I was entirely alone and wasn't frightened just to listen. It wasn't windy, so I wasn't sure what was causing the whistling. I stood there for maybe another few minutes, just kind of feeling like an adult, kind of stupid. I was only 12, but it felt kind of grown up to be here in the construction area of the woods alone. I was walking around, and it was still raining on me. I almost forgotten until all of a sudden, the whistling returns. Only this time, it's louder, but a lot closer to where I was standing. By now, I was starting to get a little scared, and I walked back to where the rest of the kids are on the golf course. I asked my best friend since I knew her the most and didn't really know the other kids that well, if she or anyone else whistled after me. She shakes her head and said, "No way. We're playing around on the other side of the course this whole time. We thought you were inside the house or something." So I thought that's really weird, but I shake it off. At this point it was raining, but not hard, and we're all in agreement about hanging out and having fun outside. One of the girls had the bright idea of heading to the woods, which is after the field. So we headed into the woods, and we were kind of playing one of those silly games that doesn't really have an objective or anything, just kind of doing whatever. As I said, I didn't really know most of the other kids too well, but had a fairly good idea of what each of them were wearing. We headed in, and were maybe about 50 feet in when all of a sudden it got freakishly quiet. I'm someone who walks cautiously, so I had my head down for a moment or two, but when I lifted my head up, I can't find anyone. It's the weirdest thing. I stopped in my tracks and tried to gauge the distance from where I thought the original spot was. When I was back with the group, it made little to no difference, because now it was becoming all the more clear that I was totally alone, as if I were picked up and dropped into the woods in the middle of nowhere, and it got dark real quick. Now I'm scared. I've really never experienced anything like this before. I tried calling out to my best friend but was met by total silence. In fact, it wasn't regular silence, it was almost deafening. The kind that you're not really used to, well at least not me, so I got really scared. I had nothing with me to help me find my bearings. Things only escalate when I heard the whistling sound again, and I stood there in silence once again. Instinctively not wanting to crunch on the leaves or break a twig, I didn't want to create a sound or attention my way, so I just want to hear it again, even though it was literally the scariest whistle I've ever heard. I can't really describe it. It sounded definitely human, as though something was missing though. My best attempt to describe it was like, it was there. It knew I was and was getting closer, and darker still. I have tears in my eyes now and I don't know what to do. I finally heard off in the distance some rattling, and one of the kids go, "Why are you over here?" I told her what happened, and she gave me this weird look like she didn't know how to respond. The others came back and I decided that unless they ask me a specific question about it, I'm going to keep it to myself. We go back into the field and back to the home. I remember looking over the lights that come from within my best friend's house and then looking back over the woods from where we just were, and I faintly heard the whistle again. After hanging out a little while watching Sailor Moon videos, it's time to go to the movies. We're really excited, and I remember it was definitely nighttime now. We're all outside now and getting into my best friend's mum's SUV, and myself and maybe like 3 or 4 other girls walked around over to the field. We're maybe 25 feet into the darkness. We're all giggling and being silly, when suddenly a bright orange light turned on ahead of us. We all scream in unison, "Back to the car." Someone said, "What is it?" I tried peering into the darkness ahead, as I made out what appears to be the figure of an old man carrying a lantern or something. We were kind of standing by the car waiting for my friend's mum to come out and for us to go, but we're kind of powerless when he was heading towards us, very slowly. We're all kind of really scared now and didn't know what to do. Thankfully I heard a sound to my right, and it was my friend's mum as she got into the driver's seat. I looked back over at the direction of the lantern, or whatever it was, but it's totally vanished. The rest of the night and slumber party was totally uneventful, and we're asking each other what each of us thought the person was. I'm 27 now, and I sometimes have nightmares about being in those woods again. I really have no explanation for it, and that whistling was the most scary thing that I've ever heard in my life. I guess I should start by saying that this happened in early September of 2016. I'm a 25-year-old female that lives in the rural part of northern Arkansas with my fiance, near the lake to be exact. It's gorgeous, lots of open land, plenty of woods and hardly any neighbours. It's what my soul always wanted. I'm also an only child, and would have been pretty much spoiled my whole life. My father, for as long as I can remember, would randomly bring toys home. Not just little toys, I'm talking go-karts, buggies, and even four-wheelers. So, since I was young, I knew how to drive just about any off-road vehicle. I loved it. We even had jet skis at one point. My parents were very laid back with me, to the point that they would nap during the day and let me ride out on the buggies until dark. I forgot to mention that I just moved recently full-time to the property. For years we'd only visit on weekends and not really do as much as we wanted, but now we could do whatever we wanted. It's great, honestly. Now, my parents live about 3 hours away from the land. Seeing them on the weekend is a treat. They bring all kinds of goodies. The land is so beautiful. about 30 acres, more than half of which is cleared. Years ago a small farm was here. The old barn still stands, and of course a pond with tons of frogs. One night, we all get a wild hare and decide to go for a night ride. My father now has a Jeep, so my fiance, him and I ride together. Me and my mother decide to ride separate wheelers. These wheelers are fairly new, automatic, so they're really easy to ride. And damn, I also forgot to mention that for miles outside the property is a wildlife reservation. So there are miles of woods and dirt trails. So many that you could be gone all night. Behind the property, about 20 minutes out, is a creek. Once you pass through it, you will go up the mountains to see the other side of Cherokee. There's also a crap ton of logging roads, but before you get into the logging trails, there's a dirt road you have to take. I've taken this for years and years now. I've had some weird feelings out there, but this night will be with me until I die. Now my dad, fiance, aunt and uncle had gone ahead of us, about 5 minutes or so. My mum and I head out after making a drink. After we pass through the creek and up the mountain, I notice the beams on my mother's wheeler begin to dim. Normally, they do this because your fan is too cool and the engine's kicked on. So I didn't think anything of it. I want to let you know that there are 5 houses near the end of the road and near the beginning, so there's about a 5-mile long gap of woods and an occasional dirt trail for a gas as well. And by the way, gas wells are everywhere up here. As we get closer to the trail we're supposed to take, my mother's wheeler starts backfiring. We stop for a second to see what's going on when it dies. Now, like I've said, I've been out in these woods my entire life. I wasn't afraid at all. No weird feelings or anything. My mum calls my dad to tell him what's going on, but no calls are going through. They must be going down the mountain, my mother said with an aggravated tone. I turn off my wheeler, but the headlights are on. The road is narrow, so narrow that 2 cars can barely squeeze by. I don't want some drunk idiot flying around the corner and not seeing us. My mum now cries out to my dad again. I start looking at her wheeler. Something isn't right. There's no power on it. But no fuel is getting to the engine, which could be caused by a lot of things. So I get my phone out to text my fiance, letting him know that we're stuck in the middle of the road. We're sitting there for a good 10 minutes when all the hairs on my body start to stand up. I immediately look in the direction of the headlights to see a man walking from pitch darkness. He had no light and said nothing. It took a second for my brain to register what I was seeing. As my mother finally got to my dad on the phone, I whisper to her, "Mom, there's a guy walking up to us." My mum tends to panic at times, and I never took my eyes off of him. He was still far enough away that I couldn't make out many features. My mum is freaking out, and I tell her to leave her stuff and jump on my wheeler, and she does so, and I tell the guy that's obviously getting closer, "Hello? What the hell?" He says nothing. That freaks me out. Like, who the hell walks down on a pitch black road in the middle of the night without a light? And not to say something as you approach strangers. And that's when it dawned on me. He must have been creeping in the woods down the road. Voices echo like crazy here, so he probably knew we were women. Normally I keep a 38 on me, but I left it at home. Of all times, why? I start my wheeler up and my mum hops on. The man's getting closer now. Now I can make out a red flannel shirt and dirty jeans. dark but not much hair, and he had a gun. Not in his hand, but on his hip, and visible. He still won't say a word to us, which makes me kinda panic even more. He's also not looking at us, but rather at the ground. I realise I can't back up because I can't see a thing behind us, so I throw it in higher and take off past him. As we pass him though, he just stood there, facing and following our direction yet never looking at us. It's pretty disturbing. We make it damn near to the creek and my mother was able to tell my dad everything. He immediately turned around when he heard us yelling. He was on a 4-wheeler and could arrive in about 4 minutes. As we met back at the wheeler, the guy's still there, on his own wheeler. My mum and I just sat there staring at this weirdo. He never gave me or my mum eye contact. I'm really getting freaked out now, and we all end up heading to the creek to talk. As we all shut our vehicles off, my dad says, "Where did he come from?" I told him, "The darkness." He just walked up without a light from the road. My fiance chimes in, he had a wheeler and tow straps. You all didn't think about this, did you? You all didn't talk to him or anything? My mum and I just stare at each other with open mouths. This guy was going to take our wheeler. He never asked us if we needed any help. He didn't say or do anything but act weird. The man had told my dad his wife heard people yelling in their driveway. We didn't pass any driveway. The next day me and my fiance head to the same spot to check out this driveway. We reached just about where the wheeler died, and just a few 100 yards down the road is an overgrown driveway. We drove up and decided to walk the rest of the way. Tucked far behind in the woods was a rundown barn. It's more of a cabin with no power, no vehicles and signs of recent life, and definitely no signs of a wife. There was an outhouse behind the barn. As we walked up to the windows, we noticed a man's wheeler sitting behind the barn. I look at my fiance, who has a scared look in his face. Inside the barn was stuff you'd expect to see in a garage. No indication of human life. As we backed away slowly, I noticed there's a van hidden in the woods around the homestead. Now I'm pretty sure it didn't work, but still. And that's when my fiance grabs my hand, and we quickly go back to the Jeep. On the way home I told him about the vans. He said he saw them too. He notices them at the same time he sees a man staring at him from inside the barn. You must always bring protection when you go to the middle of nowhere. When I was 15, me and my friends went to a large forest near where we all lived. We're just playing deep into the night, but it's still light outside because it's summer. As we're playing, we hear weird chants in the background in another language. It sounds very creepy, almost like church calls. We all look over a hill, and there we see a group of what I can only describe as occultists, with fires forming a star and a circle around that. I wish I could have said that I was brave and stayed for longer, but all of us sprinted away from there, and 30 years later it's still the most terrifying thing to ever have happened to me. Hello everyone, I just want to say thank you again to everyone who sent me stories. I really enjoyed reading them, and look forward to the rest to come. So if you have a story you'd like me to narrate, then feel free to send it to my email. Like I said at the start, I will be making a Reddit page soon, just for that, and I'm just setting it up at the minute. And I'm also going to have my podcasts online soon. I'm just sorting some things out with iTunes, but it's on its way. I hope you're all having a great day, and I hope you like my new channel art too. This is my new profile pic. I've got more artwork coming. I want to say a big thank you to Man TV too, who did this artwork. He's really a great guy. So with that out of the way, hope you're all doing great, and I'll speak to you all soon. Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well. Just a thought I had is if you're feeling like bad in the day in yourself, just focus on getting through it, and just make sure if you can put some work in to help you to get stuff done and be productive out of the day. Because for me, like today, I don't feel like good at all, and I know because I've had it so many times, like there's nothing I can do about it. I just have to focus on getting through it and just getting on with work. I'll probably feel alright again in like 4 or 5 hours or something, but for now I'm just getting on with just keeping my like self busy and like occupied with other things. And if you can get out, just get out and go and see people when you feel like this. But I just thought I'd share that because I know there's someone out there that's having the exact same thing and needs to hear it. But I enjoyed doing this video, and I love doing wood stories, and I got more of these coming. So I hope you have a great day, and I'll speak to you soon. The story I'm going to share with you took place in the North Pole, Alaska, May 20. The incident I'm going to describe was the wrong place, wrong time, and completely unprovoked. Another note, I was still only 20 when this incident occurred, and could not legally own a pistol yet. Also, I was in the army, and if you live in the barracks, you have to keep your weapons in the arms room. So it's not like it's convenient to get that out and carry it, as compared to a guy living off post who can keep his gun in his safe or in his closet. Anyway, it's on the night of Cinco de Mayo 20. I attended a party at a friend's house in the North Pole, AK. North Pole is about 20 or 30 minutes outside of Fairbanks. It is a somewhat rural area and community. Lots of houses at acre or 1 or 2 acre lot. Mostly dirt roads off of the main roads. I was designated driver that drove 4 of my friends, but 3 of the friends I brought decided that they're going to spend the rest of the night at that person's house instead of going back to the barracks. Only one friend that wasn't drinking a lot decided he wanted to go back to the barracks when I was ready to go. We ended up leaving at about 1:30 AM. As we're pulling out in the front gate, I got a call that there had been a fight at the party. They said that after the fight, everyone was going home instead of staying the night and continue drinking. They said to me, can you come back and pick them up? But said they had to go in a different friend's house that lived in the same area because everyone had to leave after the fight. Well, the GPS doesn't work that well once you get out of Fairbanks and onto on the main roads. You could get in the general area, but not the exact location. When we went to the address that was given, it came up as being in the middle of the road, so we took a turn down a side road to turn around and try and get service so that we could make a call to figure out where the house was. By this time it's around 2:30 AM. As we turn down the road, there's an old red minivan with fog lights mounted on the top just idling there with 2 guys that looked to be in their late 20s. I remembered thinking that it looked like something you'd see in a TV show or horror movie. Just a creepy looking van, especially at 3 AM in the morning. We had to pass them to turn around, and they looked at us in a way that really gave us a bad feeling. So we turned around and then had to pass them again to pull out onto the main road. As we passed them, the driver was leaning in his head and had it out to the window partially, like he wanted us to stop and say something. Being it's almost 3 AM, we know it's best to keep driving. My friend wasn't able to get a hold of anyone, so he tried mapping it out again. The GPS was delayed due to poor signal and we missed our turn again. We saw a small clearing to pull over, so we decided to pull over to the side of the road to verify where we're going. About 10 seconds later, the red minivan with fog lights pulled up next to us on my side and rolls down the windows. I roll down my window and they initiate conversation saying if we seen a white pickup Dodge truck. We say we hadn't and they say, "Alright, thanks." We then asked if they knew where Meadow Rue was, the street we're looking for. They said it's on the first street on the left, if we headed back the way we come. We was suspicious, but when we looked at the GPS, it showed that this is on the road that we're on. We now start heading towards Meadow Rue, which is about half a mile away, and saw them pull out and start heading that way behind us. We made the turn into what we thought was Meadow Rue, and this road is a bumpy dirt road and immediately forks off into two directions. One side goes straight up and the other goes up a hill. The other is to the side and left that drops down about 2 feet and flattens out. We turn left and drop down the small incline. The road was narrow, only big enough for one car, and lined with trees on both sides for a good distance. Now the first thing we notice here is a dead end sign, and that's getting us a bit worried. We drove about 20 feet and then we see the minivan with fog lights turn in, dropping behind us. At this point, my blood goes cold and I feel a sinking feeling in my stomach. At this point, I know they're following us. I try to be positive and hoping for a split second that they're just going to turn back and go away from us. But then I saw them speeding up again. Now, this is a bumpy dirt road and there's no reason to be going fast. I started speeding up and to that, they slammed into the back of my car, backed off and rammed me again. A few seconds later, we made it to a small clearing like a dirt cul-de-sac. I had enough room to pull forward and then reverse, so that I'm facing the direction I've come in. While I'm doing this, they stopped and blocked the road on the one-lane dirt road. They hop out of the car and one shouts, "This ain't Meadow Rue, idiot. Get out of the car." The one guy had positioned himself directly in front of my car, about 10 to 15 feet away between the trees and his van. The other guy started walking up to my passenger side where my friend is and they kept shouting at us to get out, but I'd gun it. And the guy just stood there. I'm trying to run him over. He managed to jump out of the way. I thought for sure there wasn't enough room for us between his van and the trees and figured we're going to get stuck, but we have no guns and that's not a better choice. I thought we'd have to bail out and run into the woods and hide, but to my surprise, we get through. It was such a tight fit that both my mirrors collapse in. I now speed out of there, getting off the main road going home. Now I saw a state trooper not long before this, and I really want to see them again. I was scared to death of being chased again and then run off the road at higher speeds. So instead of slowing down, I blew past the state trooper doing 90 in a 45. Since that's his extreme speeding, I thought it'd get the trooper's attention, but for whatever reason it didn't. There was only one turn on the whole way back, and when I slowed down to make it, the van's nowhere in sight. I still flew back at 90 miles per hour just to be safe. The next day, we try and tell our friends what happened, and no one believes us. Not one freaking person. They thought we didn't feel like driving all the way back, so we made up a story. The guy who had invited us over originally said, if we're serious, we needed to file a police report with the Alaskan State Troopers. So, we went to file a police report at the State Troopers office in town. We filled out a report. After giving our story to the trooper, he told us to wait and he then left the room. About 15 minutes later, he came back in and told us to tell the truth. Confused, we say, "What do you mean?" He said the theory is that we're too drunk, driving around late after Cinco de Mayo, and we plowed into the van. He said he thought the owner heard that happened and then came out to confront us. We repeatedly tell him that this isn't the case, and sadly we don't have evidence, but he doesn't either and lets us go. The next day, we check the area and show him on the map. I guess when he didn't find a wrecked car, he knew we're probably telling the truth. He said to meet him again and verify the area, but we told him we didn't want to go near there. After 2 weeks, he called us again to come in and ID the vehicle. He shows us a picture of a minivan, and I'm sure this is the one we saw, but I can't really know for certain. Now to this day, no one really believes my story. They think we did it just to provoke the incident, or we just made it all up to sound cool. But this did happen, and it's just a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Let's start with a little backstory. I'm a 24-year-old female that fell in love with national parks. So much so that I decided to work full-time at one for about 3 years. This experience allowed me to meet some great people, but also welcome some sketchy individuals. This particular story starts with a man that we'll call Sam. Sam was a tall man with a shaved head and glasses. He was a kind of co-worker that would always linger awkwardly. He made everyone feel uncomfortable, but not enough to warrant concern. The only issue that I really noticed was that he seemed to like drinking a lot. He would show up to work still drunk, and be sent home because of it somewhat regularly. He seemed innocent enough though, in a socially awkward way. Like he was fine, just always panicky. I only worked with him for a few months before I'm transferred to a new location. A few months after starting the new position, I was in the employee break room browsing my newsfeed when I get 5 new messages in 3 minutes. I didn't even realise people could type that fast. The messages are from Sam. Something caught me off guard because I never spoken to him outside of my last position. The messages consisted of vague threats regarding my friends and myself. He seemed upset to find out that I had gay friends and thought that I was trained but tainted from association. I was less upset at his foul perception of me and more annoyed that he targeted my friends, who are truly lovely. I am bad when it comes to taking the high road and decide to give him a piece of my mind. We weren't friends. I mean, hardly acquaintances. So I didn't feel that his behaviour was appropriate, and I quite frankly was angry. Through our exchange, the original rude context of the messages became obviously threatening. He told me I should go and die with my friends, and that he'd be happy to see our misery. I'm shocked. His anger didn't make sense to me, and I realised that I wasn't going to be the reason that this lunatic ended up getting to HR. We worked within the same company, so I think my best route to prevent further harassment is this. HR advised me to block contact from him while they investigate, but also alert the authorities in case he acts out on his threats. Authorities are involved and are not fazed by the messages. They almost seem annoyed that I bothered them. I fill out a statement and was told to contact them if it progresses. The next day, I woke up to find trash all over my front steps. This is odd but not too strange. I actually thought it's a raccoon since I'm in a national park. I then saw a piece of paper though with some words on it next to it. It says "Watch your back." I look around to see the other neighbouring cabins, but nobody's watching. I clean up the mess but save the note. I wanted to show my sister who lived with me. When she got back home later that morning, I called her up on the previous night's events. She didn't even know Sam because, like I said, we're not friends. Why would I mention him in my personal life? I mean, God. I gave her a brief description of him in case she saw him lurking around and headed to work. Halfway throughout my shift, I get a phone call from Alexa. She sounds shaken when she tells me that a man matching Sam's description come to our cabin asking where I was. She plays dumb and pretended to not even know me. He then says, I'll be back later, and walks away. She said he sounded and acted like he'd been heavily drinking and had some intense coldness to him, like he could just kill and not care about it. I'm not messing around at this point, and have watched enough crime shows to know that you shouldn't underestimate someone. So I called the company security team and asked to have someone check out on my sister and for her to be escorted home immediately. I'm home within 20 minutes of her phone call. She gave me some security information and they're able to find out which cabin he resided in. And great for me, it's only a 2-minute walk down our street, which is really unnerving. Park rangers are called again, and they get more statements from the both of us and decide to pay him a visit. They seem to be taking the situation more seriously now that he knows where I live. They come back after talking to his roommate. It's confirmed that he lives there, but he hasn't been home since the night before. Authorities put a word out to keep an eye out for Sam. They offer to have a unit keep an eye out for us, which we gladly accept and go to sleep. I then wake up to 34 messages from an unknown number. It's Sam again. He got very angry that HR and Rangers were involved. He said, "You're gonna pay for this. You mess with the wrong person, I'm gonna end you." I email HR presenting them screenshots of this, and I demand they resolve this immediately. I want to set up a meeting with our directors to discuss termination. See, in national parks, you're hired and the company provides cheap housing on site. And when you're fired, you have to leave the national park within 24 hours. So I thought this would be a resolution to the majority of my problems. They seem to agree with me and try to locate Sam for a meeting. No one has seen him since the first messages began 2 days prior, so the park's on a manhunt. The park is huge and it's easy to hide in if you don't want to be found. Thankfully for me, his roommate alerted officials when he stumbled in drunk the next day. They're able to speak with him sober and get him into the HR building a couple of hours later. After the meeting, I'm mortified that he's been given a first and final write-up and will continue to work and live on my street. He's apparently given a sob-story about his personal issues and promises to leave me alone. I was baffled that, even with him threatening to kill me, they aren't gonna fire him. Thankfully, the Rangers are equally surprised and still offer surveillance just in case. I was quiet for 3 days. I thought it was actually over, and started feeling bad for him. I thought maybe he was going through stuff, and I was just his mental punching bag. I didn't agree with it, but I no longer felt as threatened, if that makes sense. This is until I get a knock on my door and find 2 Rangers wanting to speak with me. According to the Rangers, a few people from the HR department, Sam's roommate had to call the emergency line when he started acting bizarre after the meeting and tried to convince him to lure me to a secluded place so Sam could take care of me. Thankfully, his roommate wasn't a psycho and reported the situation immediately once Sam went to the bathroom. Rangers were on site within minutes and had him restrained in order to search the cabin. They ended up finding a loaded firearm and suspected suicide note that stated he was going to kill me, then himself. There was also enough evidence found to ban him from all national parks. I have since moved to a different one and changed my contact info. He has since contacted me once to brag about how much I helped him secure unemployment benefits, which I quirkily shared to officials. According to officials, he is restricted to a southern AZ county due to other crimes that he later committed. As for HR, The director had to deal with harassment from Sam after the banning and asked me to testify on his behalf. I haven't heard anything since. I don't understand why he targeted me. We hadn't had very many interactions even at work. I have tried to dig through memories to find a single time that I may have invented or invited this kind of behaviour, but I'm convinced it wasn't me, it was him. I hope I never see him again. A number of years ago, I was up in the northern end of BC, in the islands out by Port Hardy. I set up camp right by the beach close to the shore, did the normal catch of fish and cook it for dinner over my campfire. It's pretty perfect really. A few hours pass and it's getting dark. I climbed into the tent and fall asleep quickly. I get woken up by extremely heavy breathing on the beach from something big in the area of my fire, but the tide was in now, so the waves would have covered it. My first thought is that it's a bear, but on the islands where I was, bears aren't common at all, to the point that there hasn't been one documented ever. This is blasting through my mind. The thought of Bigfoot also runs through my mind. At this point, I'm like, yeah, there's no such thing as Bigfoot, so what the hell is it? I gain my courage and open my tent. I shine my flashlight around for a bit, but I don't see anything, so get out of my tent. I am shining my light around when I hear it again. This huge breath followed by a small splash. I focus my light on the beach when I see a massive orca rolling around, and it's near my fire. This behemoth of a marine mammal scared the life out of me, but it turned into being an amazing thing. It's a massive animal just playing in front of me. I noticed them just off the shore bobbing, probably half asleep. I still didn't sleep for the rest of the night. This happened when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. I have a sister who is 8 years younger than me, so she's about 1 or 2 at the time. During the summer months in Calgary, Canada, my family and another 3 or 4 families would frequently have barbecues out in Browness Park. For those of you unfamiliar with Browness Park, it's a very large public park in Calgary that has a lot of picnic areas, playgrounds and fountains for the kids to play at. The area is so large that you'd have to walk 5 or 10 minutes between playgrounds and picnic areas and bathrooms. So often us kids would have to leave the adults to go and play in the fountains on the playground, and it was generally safe enough that we never had any issues. I recall one time we went and we were playing in our bathing suits when I see this tall guy with glasses and a large cowboy hat sitting on a bench outside of the fountain area just watching us. I was a naive kid who never had any prior talks about stranger danger or any of that stuff, and his cowboy hat made me automatically assume I'm dealing with a park ranger. After a couple of hours, we leave the fountains to eat with the adults. My babysitter announced she needs to use the bathroom. She was nearly potty trained at this point, but not completely. My mum says, "Can you go to the bathroom," which is like 10 minutes away. I just remember walking with them when a guy comes up and says hello, starting a conversation. Wearing a cowboy hat, I again assume that he's another park ranger. He was asking for our names and ages, and overall had a very friendly demeanour. So our idiotic selves talk openly to him. I don't notice that he had a particular interest in my baby sister, and even at one point asked to hold her, but she's too fussy and wants to walk. This went on until we reached the bathrooms. We part ways and we go inside the bathroom. Now, this is when even my naive self started feeling like something's wrong. My sister ended up having an accident on herself, asking my friend to stay with her in the bathroom while I ran to get more clothes from my mum. When I stepped out of the bathroom, I found that same strange guy standing a couple of feet away from the bathroom, clearly waiting for something. That's when my alarm bells started going off. I ran back to the kitchen area and told my mum that I think some guy's following us, and she came with me to the bathroom. When the guy saw me with my mother approaching about 100 meters away, he booked it, power walking in the opposite direction as fast as possible without attracting any attention from anyone. At the time, I completely forgot about what happened. It wasn't until a couple of years later that I suddenly realised that the strange man was waiting for us. And it's the same guy who approached us before pretending to be a park ranger. So I can only assume he's been waiting for hours and waited for us to leave the adults before approaching. Now this particular area doesn't even have park rangers. I have no idea what his true intentions were, but I'm so grateful I never had to find out.